Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The radio crackled at 9:47 p.m., pulling Sheriff Abner Calhoun out of a half-sleep he didn't realize he'd fallen into. His office in Wardell County sat at the end of a two-lane blacktop that disappeared into darkness in both directions. And on nights like this, when the wind came hard off the basin and the nearest sodium lamp was 4 miles back, the building felt less like a command center and more like a lighthouse surrounded by an ocean of dust and mesquite. Calhoun lifted his head from where it had been resting against the back of his chair. The dispatch radio hissed and popped with static, the way it always did when weather rolled in from the west. He was 53 years old, with skin the color and texture of the old saddle leather, and he'd been wearing the star in Wardell County for almost 19 years. Long enough to know the difference between routine static and the kind that preceded something worth paying attention to. Unit 7, this is dispatch. You copy? The voice belonged to Marlene Hodge, the night dispatcher who worked Tuesdays through Saturdays and had a voice like gravel rolling down a tin roof. Calhoun reached for the handset, thumbing the transmit button. This is 7. Go ahead, Marlene. Got a call from Sabine Muldoon out at the old Kincaid Ranch. Says she's seeing lights moving around the old Permian 6 pumping station. You know the one? Calhoun knew it. Everyone in Wardell County knew Permian 6, though most people under 40 had never actually seen it. The station had been shut down in 1987 when the oil company went belly up during the price crash, and for the last 30-some years it had just sat there, a rusted-out monument to boom times that never came back. The county had tried selling the land twice, but nobody wanted 40 acres of calichy hardpan with a contaminated wellhead and a cinder block building full of asbestos. What kind of lights? Calhoun asked, already standing and reaching for his jacket. The office suddenly felt colder. She didn't say exactly, just said they were moving wrong. Her words, Sheriff, moving wrong. Calhoun paused with one arm in his jacket sleeve. Sabine Muldoon was 71 years old and had been ranching the land adjacent to Permian 6 since before Calhoun was born. She wasn't the type to call in reports about headlights or teenagers drinking beer. If Sabine said something was moving wrong, it was worth the drive. Tell her I'm on my way, ETA about 25 minutes. Copy that. And Sheriff, she sounded spooked, really spooked. The line went dead before Calhoun could respond. He stood in the middle of his office for a moment, looking at the radio as if it might offer some additional context. Then he grabbed his maglite from the desk, checked his service weapon, a Glock 22 that he'd carried for the better part of a decade, and headed for the door. The drive out to Permian 6 took him west on County Road 1190, a strip of asphalt so old and sun-cracked that it looked like alligator skin. Calhoun's cruiser, a white Dodge Charger with Wardell County Sheriff stenciled on both sides, hummed along at 60 miles per hour, its headlights cutting weak cones through the darkness. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest town, the night was absolute. No street lights, no porch lights, no glow from distant windows. Just the occasional reflective eyes of a jackrabbit caught in the high beams before it bolted into the scrub. The landscape was flat and featureless, the kind of terrain that made people from back east uncomfortable because it offered no landmarks, no sense of scale. Just endless stretches of creosote bush and prickly pear, broken up every few miles by the skeletal remains of old derricks or the low silhouette of a wind-scoured ranch house. The wind tonight was strong enough to rock the cruiser slightly as it drove. carrying with it the smell of dust and crude oil, that peculiar West Texas perfume that got into your clothes and never quite came out. Calhoun had the radio tuned to the county frequency, but it was quiet. Deputy Tolliver Greer, everyone called him Toll, was out on patrol somewhere in the southern part of the county, probably parked behind the Dairy Queen in Lenora, watching for speeders. Not that there would be many. On a Tuesday night in late October, most folks in Wardell County were home in bed by 10 o'clock. As he drove, Calhoun found himself thinking about Permian 6. He'd been out there maybe a dozen times over the years, mostly responding to reports of trespassers or checking on vagrants who sometimes used the old pump house as shelter. The place had a reputation, the way abandoned industrial sites always do in small towns. Teenagers told stories about it. Ghost stories mostly, the usual nonsense about workers who'd died in accidents and now haunted the rusted equipment. Calhoun had never paid much attention to that kind of talk. But there was something about Permian 6 that had always bothered him, though he'd never quite been able to articulate what it was. Maybe it was the way the wind sounded when it blew through the pump house's broken windows, a low moaning that could make the hair on your arms stand up if you weren't expecting it. Or maybe it was the stillness of the place, the way it seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. Whatever it was, Calhoun had never liked spending time there, and he was always glad when a call was resolved and he could get back in his cruiser and leave. The turnoff for Sabine Muldoon's ranch came up on the left, marked by a weathered wooden sign that read, Muldoon Cattle Co., in faded red letters. Calhoun slowed and took the turn, his tires crunching over the cattle guard. The ranch road was unpaved, just two parallel tracks of packed dirt separated by a ridge of dried grass, and the cruiser bounced and jolted as it navigated the ruts. A quarter-mile in, Calhoun saw the lights of Sabine's house, a low, ranch-style structure with a corrugated metal roof and a wraparound porch. The windows glowed yellow with lamplight, and Sabine's pickup, a battered Ford F-250 that was probably older than Calhoun, sat parked in the driveway. As he pulled up and killed the engine, the front door opened, and Sabine stepped out onto the porch. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with white hair pulled back in a bun, and a face that looked like it had been carved from mesquite wood. She wore jeans, work boots, and a fleece-lined denim jacket, and she was holding a flashlight in one hand. Even from 30 feet away, Calhoun could see the tension in her posture. "Sheriff," she called out as he climbed out of the cruiser. "Thanks for coming." Calhoun walked up to the porch, his boots thudding on the wooden steps. "Marlene said you saw lights out at Permian 6. Sabine nodded, glancing over her shoulder toward the west. From where they stood, Permian 6 was maybe 2 miles away, hidden by the darkness and the rolling terrain. "Started seeing them about 2 hours ago. I was out checking on a water tank, and when I came back to the house I noticed them. 3, maybe 4 lights, moving around inside the pump house. Could have been kids," Calhoun offered, though he didn't really believe it. Kids avoided Permian 6 these days. The asbestos warnings and the stories had seen to that. "That's what I thought at first," Sabine said. "But then I watched them for a while, and Sheriff, they weren't moving like people. They were drifting, like they were floating. And every so often they'd just stop. Not like someone standing still, but like they'd just switched off." Calhoun felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You still see them now?" Sabine shook her head. "Not for the last 20 minutes or so. But I thought you should know, it didn't feel right." They stood there for a moment, both of them looking west toward where Permian 6 sat invisible in the darkness. The wind gusted, carrying with it that smell of dust and oil, and somewhere far away a coyote howled, the sound thin and lonely. "I'll go take a look," Calhoun said finally. "Probably nothing, but I'll check it out." "You want me to come with you?" Sabine asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "No, ma'am, you stay here. I'll radio in when I know what's what." Sabine nodded and stepped back toward her door. "Be careful, Sheriff. I've lived out here my whole life, and I've never seen anything move the way those lights were moving." Calhoun got back in his cruiser and followed the ranch road west, away from Sabine's house. After about a mile, the road forked, and he took the right branch which led toward Permian 6. The terrain here was even rougher, the road barely more than a suggestion, and the cruiser's suspension groaned as it navigated the washboard surface. He'd driven this route maybe a dozen times before, always during the day, and he found himself wishing now that he'd come out here more recently, just to refamiliarize himself with the layout. The pump station sat in a shallow depression, surrounded by low hills on 3 sides. The access road came in from the northeast, which meant Calhoun would be approaching from above, with a view down into the site. As he crested the final rise, he killed his headlights and let the cruiser roll to a stop. The pump station lay below him, maybe 300 yards away, and even in the darkness he could make out its basic shape. The long, low silhouette of the pump house, the skeletal framework of the old derrick, the thick black line of the pipeline that ran south toward the highway. The whole site was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, though sections of the fence had collapsed over the years and now lay flat on the ground, rusted and useless. Calhoun sat in the darkness, engine idling, and studied the scene. He didn't see any lights, no movement, just the wind-blown hulk of the station sitting silent and dead in the basin. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. Go ahead, 7. I'm at Permian 6. No visual on any lights or activity. I'm going to approach on foot and take a look around." "Copy that. You want me to send Toll your way?" Calhoun thought about it. Toll was probably 40 minutes out, and there was no point pulling him off patrol for what was likely nothing. "Negative. I'll check in when I'm done. 10-4, be safe, Sheriff." Calhoun clipped the radio back to his belt and killed the engine. The sudden silence was profound. He could hear the wind rattling through the mesquite and the faint ticking of the cruiser's cooling engine, but nothing else. He grabbed his mag light, checked his weapon again, more out of habit than necessity, and climbed out of the car. The night was cold, maybe 50 degrees, and the wind cut right through his jacket. Calhoun started down the slope toward the pump station, moving slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. The ground was littered with rocks and dried brush, and more than once his boot caught on something and he had to catch himself. Above him the stars were brilliant and uncountable. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. Out here, away from any town, the night sky was something to see. But Calhoun didn't look up. He kept his eyes on the pump station. As he got closer, details emerged from the darkness. The pump house was maybe 60 feet long and 30 feet wide, built from cinder block and painted a faded industrial green. Most of the windows were broken and the metal door hung crooked on its hinges. To the left of the pump house stood the derrick, a lattice of rusted steel that rose maybe 50 feet into the air, swaying slightly in the wind. Beyond that was the old storage tank, a cylindrical structure maybe 20 feet tall, with a ladder running up one side. Calhoun reached the collapsed section of fence and stepped over it, his boots crunching on gravel and broken glass. He was maybe 100 feet from the pump house now, and he paused, sweeping his flashlight beam across the building's facade. The windows stared back at him like empty eye sockets, revealing nothing. "Sheriff's Department," he called out, his voice swallowed by the wind. "Anyone here needs to identify themselves." No response, just the wind and the faint creaking of the derrick. Calhoun moved forward, angling toward the pump house's main entrance. As he walked, his flashlight beam picked out details: a rusted oil drum lying on its side, a coil of old chain, the skeletal remains of what might have been a workbench. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, undisturbed except for the tracks of small animals, rabbits, maybe, or rats. He reached the door and pulled it open. The hinges screamed in protest, the sound loud enough to make him wince. The interior of the pump house was a large open space, maybe 40 feet deep, filled with the shadowy shapes of old equipment. Calhoun swept his flashlight across the room, illuminating rusted pipes, a control panel with its glass faces shattered, a row of metal lockers along the far wall. And in the center of the room, sitting on the concrete floor, was something that made Calhoun stop dead in his tracks. It was a circle, maybe 8 feet in diameter, drawn, or burned, or scratched, he couldn't tell which, into the concrete. The line was perfectly uniform, as if it had been created with a compass, and within the circle were symbols that Calhoun didn't recognize. Not letters, not numbers, just angular shapes that seemed to twist the longer he looked at them. Calhoun stood in the doorway, his flashlight trained on the circle, and felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The room was cold, colder than it should have been, and there was a smell in the air that he couldn't quite place. Not oil, not dust, something else, something organic and wrong. He took a step forward, then stopped. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to turn around and leave, to get back in his cruiser and drive away and never come back. But he was the sheriff. This was his county. And whatever this was, it was his job to deal with it. Calhoun moved into the room, keeping his flashlight on the circle. As he got closer, he could see that the symbols weren't just drawn on the concrete. They were cut into it, gouged deep enough that they would have required tools and time. This wasn't vandalism. This was deliberate, methodical. He circled around the design, looking for anything else out of place. The rest of the pump house appeared undisturbed, just decades of industrial decay and neglect. But the circle was fresh, or at least fresher than it should have been. The cuts in the concrete were clean, not weathered. A week old, maybe. 2 at most. Calhoun was about to reach for his radio when he heard it. A sound, faint and distant, but distinct. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the building, from one of the back rooms, or maybe from outside, beyond the far wall. It sounded like humming. Not mechanical humming like an engine or a generator. Human humming. A tune he almost recognized but couldn't quite place. He drew his weapon, holding the flashlight alongside the barrel in a 2-handed grip. "Sheriff's Department, I know you're in here. Come out now." The humming stopped. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. Calhoun could hear his own breathing, harsh and loud in his ears. He could hear his heart hammering against his ribs, but nothing else. No footsteps, no voice, nothing. He moved toward the back of the pump house, toward a doorway that led to what he remembered as a storage area. The door was closed, and as Calhoun approached it, he noticed something that made his stomach clench. There was light coming from underneath the door. Not bright, just a faint orange glow, like candlelight or the dying embers of a fire. Calhoun reached for the doorknob. It was ice cold, so cold that it burned his palm. He jerked his hand back, then wrapped his jacket sleeve around his fingers and tried again. The knob turned easily, and the door swung inward. The storage room was empty, completely empty. No equipment, no furniture, nothing. Just bare concrete walls and floor. But the light was there, a faint, pulsing glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, or maybe from the air. Calhoun couldn't tell. It was like trying to focus on something in a dream, something that kept shifting and changing the more you looked at it. And in the center of the room, floating about 3 feet off the ground, was a radio. Not a modern radio. An old one, the kind Calhoun remembered from his childhood, with a wood-grain case and a fabric speaker grill and analog dials. It was pristine, not a speck of dust on it, and it was turned on. The dial glowed softly, tuned to a frequency that showed nothing but numbers, 105.8. As Calhoun stared at it, the radio crackled to life. At first, it was just static, the familiar white noise of empty airwaves. But then, slowly, something emerged from the static. A voice, male, middle-aged, speaking English but with an accent Calhoun couldn't place. Unit responding to 10 to 54 at Permian 6, please advise your 20. Calhoun felt ice flood his veins. A 1054 was an old code, one the department hadn't used in decades. It meant possible dead body. The voice continued, mechanical and distant. Repeat, unit responding. Please advise your 20. We show no GPS on your vehicle. Are you on foot? Confirm. Calhoun backed out of the room, his weapon still raised, his flashlight beam shaking. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. Radios didn't float. Dispatchers didn't broadcast on FM frequencies. And the county hadn't used 10 codes like that since before Calhoun became sheriff. He was halfway across the main room when the voice changed. Sheriff Calhoun. He froze. The voice was clearer now, coming through stronger, and it was speaking directly to him. Sheriff Calhoun, you need to leave. You're not supposed to be here. Not tonight. Not yet. Who is this? Calhoun shouted at the doorway. At the radio he could no longer see. Identify yourself. You need to leave, the voice repeated, and now there was urgency in it. Something approaching panic. They're coming back. They always come back when someone sees the circle. You have to go. Now. Calhoun didn't wait to hear more. He turned and ran, bursting through the front door and into the night. He sprinted across the compound, stumbling over debris, not caring about the noise he was making. He could hear something behind him now, not footsteps, but a sound like wind rushing through a tunnel, building and building until it was almost deafening. He scrambled over the collapsed fence and up the slope toward his cruiser. His lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he didn't stop. He could see the Charger now, a dark shape silhouetted against the stars, and he pushed himself harder, faster. He reached the car and yanked the door open, throwing himself into the driver's seat. His hands shook as he jammed the key into the ignition and started the engine. The headlights snapped on, flooding the pump station with light. And in that light, Calhoun saw them. 3 figures standing in a line in front of the pump house. They were tall, impossibly tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, and thin, their proportions all wrong. They didn't move. They just stood there, facing him, and even from 300 yards away, Calhoun could feel them watching him. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, they were gone, not walking away, not fading, just gone, between one heartbeat and the next. Calhoun threw the cruiser into reverse and backed up 20 feet, then swung around and floored the accelerator. The Charger fishtailed on the loose gravel before the tires found purchase, and then he was racing back toward the ranch road, his headlights bouncing crazily as the car jolted over the rough terrain. He didn't slow down until he was back on County Road 1190, with pavement under his tires and miles between him and Permian 6. Calhoun didn't remember the drive back to town. One moment he was racing down County Road 1190, with his hands locked on the steering wheel and his heart trying to punch through his rib cage, and the next he was sitting in the parking lot behind the sheriff's office with the engine still running and dawn beginning to gray the eastern horizon. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. Not the slight tremor of adrenaline wearing off, but a full-body shake that made his teeth chatter. He clenched his fists until his knuckles went white, forcing the shaking to stop through sheer will. Then he killed the engine, climbed out of the cruiser and walked into the building through the back entrance. The office was empty. Marlene had gone home at midnight, and the day dispatcher wouldn't arrive for another 2 hours. Calhoun moved through the darkened hallway to his office, shut the door, and sat down at his desk. The room smelled like old coffee and paper, familiar and grounding. He needed grounding right now. What he'd seen at Permian 6, what he thought he'd seen, didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. Radios didn't float in midair. Voices didn't come through on FM frequencies calling out 10 codes that hadn't been used in 30 years. And figures didn't just appear and disappear like someone had flipped a switch, but he'd seen it. All of it. Calhoun reached for his desk phone, then stopped. Who would he call? And what would he say? That he'd responded to a routine check and found some kind of... what? Haunting? Phenomenon? The words died in his throat before he could even form them. He was 53 years old, a career lawman with 19 years as sheriff under his belt. He couldn't file a report about floating radios and disappearing figures. They'd have him evaluated, put him on medical leave, and maybe they'd be right to do it. He sat there for a long time, watching the sky lighten through his office window. The sun came up red and angry, the way it did in West Texas when there was dust in the air. And by the time full daylight arrived, Calhoun had made a decision. He was going to find out what the hell was going on at Permian 6. But he was going to do it quietly, without involving the department, without putting anything on record that might come back to haunt him. He'd start with the voice on the radio. That voice had mentioned a 10 to 54, a possible dead body, and it had come through on a frequency that showed 105.8, which wasn't even in the range the department used. Calhoun stood and walked to the filing room at the back of the building. The Wardell County Sheriff's Department had been using digital records for the last 5 years, but everything prior to that was still stored in banker's boxes on metal shelving that reached from floor to ceiling. He found the section marked 1980 to 1989 and started pulling boxes. It took him an hour. The records were disorganized, filed by year but not by case type, and Calhoun had to leaf through incident reports, arrest records, and administrative paperwork before he finally found what he was looking for. October 17, 1985. A traffic stop near Permian 6. The reporting officer was Deputy Marshal Teague, a name Calhoun vaguely remembered from his early days with the department. Teague had retired in the early 90s and died maybe 5 years ago. Heart attack, if Calhoun recalled correctly. According to the report, Teague had pulled over a vehicle on County Road 1190 at approximately 10:30 p.m. for a broken taillight. The driver was listed as John Doe, transient, no ID. But that wasn't what made Calhoun's blood run cold. At the bottom of the report, in the section marked Disposition, someone had written in red ink, "Case suspended by order of Sheriff Vaughn, no further action." And beneath that, in different handwriting, hurried, almost illegible, someone had added, "Vehicle towed to Permian 6 compound. Driver released. Do not pursue." Calhoun read the report 3 times, then pulled out his phone and took photographs of every page. Sheriff Vaughn had been in charge of the department from 1979 until his death in 1986, when Calhoun had still been a deputy in his 20s. He'd been at Vaughn's funeral. The man had died in his sleep, a brain aneurysm, sudden and complete. But why would Vaughn suspend a routine traffic stop? And why would a towed vehicle be taken to Permian 6 instead of the impound lot? Calhoun checked the date again, October 17, 1985. The pump station had still been operational then, though barely. The oil company would shut it down less than 2 years later. He tried to remember if there had been any talk about the place back then, any incidents or complaints, but his memory came up empty. In 1985, he'd been working patrol in the eastern part of the county, rarely venturing out toward the basin. He was about to put the file back when something fell out from between the pages. A photograph, old and faded, printed on the kind of photo paper they'd used before everything went digital. It showed a vehicle, a sedan, dark-colored, maybe a Buick or an Oldsmobile, parked in front of the Permian 6 pump house. The photo had been taken during the day, and in the background Calhoun could see the derrick and part of the chain-link fence, but it was the foreground that made his mouth go dry. Standing next to the vehicle facing the camera was a figure, tall, too tall, maybe 7 feet, with proportions that were just slightly wrong, arms too long and torso too narrow. The image was grainy and overexposed, but Calhoun could see enough to know that this was the same kind of figure he'd seen last night. He flipped the photo over. On the back, in pencil, someone had written, 10/17/85, evidence photo, M. Teague. Calhoun sat down hard in his chair, the photograph clutched in his hand. This wasn't new. Whatever was happening at Permian 6, it had been happening for at least 38 years. And someone, Sheriff Vaughn, maybe others, had known about it and buried it. By 8 o'clock, the office was filling up with the day shift. Calhoun heard voices in the hallway, the coffee maker gurgling to life in the break room, the familiar rhythms of a small-town sheriff's department starting its day. He should have been out there with them, but instead he sat at his desk with the door closed, staring at a photograph that shouldn't exist. There was a knock on his door. Before Calhoun could respond, it opened, and Deputy Tolliver Greer stuck his head in. Toll was 32, tall and raw-boned, with a sunburned face and pale blue eyes that missed very little. He'd been with the department for 6 years, and Calhoun trusted him more than anyone else on the force. "Morning, Sheriff," Toll said. "You okay? You look like you've been rode hard and put away wet." Calhoun managed something that might have been a smile. "Rough night. Got called out to Permian 6 around 10. Toll's expression shifted slightly. "Permian 6? What for?" "Sabine Muldoon saw lights moving around out there. Thought it might be trespassers." Calhoun paused, choosing his words carefully. Turned out to be nothing, probably just headlights reflecting off the equipment. It was a lie, and he could see that Toll knew it was a lie, but the deputy didn't press. Instead, he stepped into the office and closed the door behind him. "Sheriff, I've been meaning to ask you something. It's probably nothing, but go ahead." "Last month, I had to respond to a vandalism call out near the old Texaco station on Highway 176. You know, the one that's been closed since forever?" Toll waited for Calhoun's nod before continuing. "When I got there, I found somebody'd been spray painting on the walls. Usual stuff, gang tags, dirty words. But there was one thing that stood out. Someone had painted a circle on the floor inside the garage bay. Big one, maybe 10 feet across. And inside the circle were these symbols. Weird-looking things, angular." Calhoun felt his pulse quicken. "What'd you do with it?" "Nothing much I could do. No witnesses, no suspects. I took some photos for the file and had the owner clean it up. But here's the thing. I went back there last week to follow up, and the owner said the circle had reappeared. He'd painted over it, covered the whole floor with fresh concrete, and 3 days later it was back. Same size, same symbols, like it had burned through the concrete from underneath." "You get photos of that too?" "Yeah." Toll pulled out his phone, swiped through a few screens, and handed it to Calhoun. "I was going to write it up as a report today, but honestly, I don't even know what category to file it under." Calhoun looked at the photograph on Toll's phone. The circle was there, just as described, with symbols inside that were angular and wrong. The same symbols he'd seen last night at Permian 6. His hand tightened on the phone. Where exactly is this Texaco station? About 12 miles south of Permian 6, right where Highway 176 intersects with County Road 1190. Toll paused. Why? You think there's a connection? Calhoun didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about the map of Wardell County, the way the roads connected, the distances between locations. Permian 6 to the Texaco station was 12 miles, a straight line, more or less, and if there were circles at both locations, then maybe there were more. Maybe there was a pattern. I need you to do something for me, Calhoun said, handing the phone back. And I need you to keep it quiet. Toll's expression turned serious. What kind of quiet are we talking about? The kind where it doesn't go in any official report. The kind where it stays between you and me until I say otherwise. The deputy studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, what do you need? I need you to pull every abandoned property file we have for the western half of the county. Industrial sites, closed businesses, foreclosed ranches, anything that's been sitting empty for more than 10 years. And I need you to mark them on a map. Looking for something specific? Yeah. Calhoun stood and walked to the window, looking out at the morning sun beating down on the parking lot. I'm looking for a pattern. It took Toll most of the day to compile the information, working between calls and his regular patrol duties. By 4 o'clock, he had a county map spread out on Calhoun's desk with 12 locations marked in red. Permian 6, the Texaco station, an old cotton gin north of Lenora, a abandoned ranch house near the county line, a closed-down meat packing plant, 8 more scattered across the western quarter of Wardell County. Calhoun stared at the map, his coffee going cold in his hand. The locations didn't form an obvious pattern. No straight lines, no perfect geometric shapes. But there was something there, something just at the edge of his perception, like trying to see a constellation in a sky full of stars. What are we looking at? Toll asked quietly. I don't know yet. Calhoun traced his finger across the map, connecting Permian 6 to the Texaco station, then to the cotton gin, then to the ranch house. But I think we need to check these locations, all of them. Looking for what? More circles? Maybe. Or maybe something else, evidence of activity. Toll raised an eyebrow. Activity. You want to be more specific about that, Sheriff? Calhoun turned from the map and looked at his deputy. Toll deserved the truth, or at least as much truth as Calhoun could give him without sounding insane. Last night at Permian 6, I found a circle carved into the concrete inside the pump house. Same symbols you photographed at the Texaco station. And I found other things. Things I can't explain and won't put in a report because I don't want to get sectioned for a psych evaluation. What kind of things? The kind that make you question what you saw. The kind that make you want to drive as far from here as possible and never look back. Calhoun picked up the photograph he'd found in the old case file and handed it to Toll. This was taken in 1985 at Permian 6. It was buried in a suspended case file. I need you to tell me what you see in this picture. Toll studied the photograph for a long time, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, his face had gone pale. That's not human. No, it's not. Jesus Christ, Sheriff, what is this? I don't know, but it's been here for at least 38 years, probably longer. And whatever it is, it's connected to these abandoned sites. Calhoun tapped the map. We're going to visit every single one of these locations. We're going to document what we find. And then we're going to figure out what the hell is happening in my county. Toll set the photograph down carefully as if it might shatter. When do we start? Tonight, after dark. Whatever this is, it seems to be more active at night. And if we find something, what then? Calhoun looked back at the map, at the red marks scattered across the western quarter of Wardell County like drops of blood on pale skin. Then we figure out how to stop it. They left the office at 9 p.m., taking Calhoun's personal truck instead of a department vehicle. The truck was a 10-year-old Ford F-150, navy blue, with a toolbox in the bed and a rifle rack in the rear window. Anonymous, unremarkable, the kind of vehicle that wouldn't draw attention even if someone did happen to see it. Their first stop was the old Cotton Gin north of Lenora, a massive structure of corrugated metal and rotting wood that had processed cotton from local farms until the early 90s. The building sat at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by fields that had gone fallow and reverted to scrub grass and mesquite. Calhoun parked the truck about 100 yards away and they approached on foot, each carrying a flashlight and their service weapons. The front doors had been chained shut, but one of the loading dock bays was open, the rolling door frozen halfway up on rusted tracks. They ducked underneath and entered the building. The interior was vast and shadowy, filled with the skeletons of old machinery, conveyor belts, ginning equipment, sorting tables. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and bird droppings, and the air smelled like rot and mildew. Their footsteps echoed in the empty space as they moved deeper into the building, their flashlight beams cutting weak paths through the darkness. "What are we looking for?" Toll asked, his voice hushed. "Anything out of place. Anything that shouldn't be here." They found it in what had once been the foreman's office, a small room at the back of the building with a metal desk and a filing cabinet. The desk and cabinet had been pushed aside, shoved against the walls, and in the center of the room was a circle. It was smaller than the ones at Permian 6 and the Texaco station, maybe 5 feet in diameter, but the symbols inside were identical, and unlike those other circles, this one looked recent. Fresh. "Sheriff," Toll said quietly, "look at this." He was pointing at the wall behind where the desk had been. Someone had written on the concrete in what looked like chalk, 10/17/85, open door, they came through. Calhoun felt ice water flood his veins. October 17th, 1985, the same date as the suspended traffic stop, the same date as the photograph. "There's more," Toll said, moving his flashlight beam along the wall. More chalk writing covered the surface. Line after line of cramped, hurried script. Vaughn knew. Vaughn made a deal. They take what they want. We look away. 38 years. How many gone? How many taken? And at the bottom, in larger letters, the circle opens again when the wind comes from the west. Calhoun read the words twice, his mind racing. A deal. Sheriff Vaughn had made a deal with something that came through circles and took people, and whatever that deal had been, it had held for 38 years. Until now. "Sheriff," Toll said, and there was an edge to his voice that made Calhoun turn. "We're not alone." Calhoun followed his deputy's gaze. Through the open door of the office, out in the main processing area, something was moving. Not walking, gliding, the way those figures had moved at Permian 6. 3 of them, tall and impossibly thin, drifting between the old machinery like smoke. "Back door," Calhoun whispered. "Now." They moved quickly but carefully, backing out of the office and toward the rear exit they'd spotted on their way in. The figures didn't pursue, didn't even seem to notice them. They just continued their strange, purposeless movement through the building, appearing and disappearing behind equipment like fish in murky water. Calhoun and Toll made it outside and ran for the truck. They didn't speak until they were back on the highway, putting distance between themselves and the cotton gin. What the hell were those things? Toll finally asked, his knuckles white on the dashboard. I don't know, but I think they've been here a long time, and I think Sheriff Vaughn knew about them. The writing said he made a deal. Yeah. Calhoun stared at the road ahead, his headlights cutting through the darkness. Yeah, it did. What kind of deal would you make with something like that? Calhoun didn't answer, because he was afraid he already knew. You'd make the kind of deal where you looked the other way, where you suspended case files and buried evidence and let things happen that shouldn't happen, where you traded other people's safety for your own, for the county's, for some twisted version of peace. And now, 38 years later, that deal was coming undone. They hit 3 more locations that night. An abandoned ranch house where they found another circle and more chalk writing. A closed-down meat packing plant where the circle was painted on the floor in something dark that might have been blood. And finally, just before dawn, the old Texaco station where Toll had first spotted the phenomenon. At each location, they found the same things: circles, symbols, and evidence of the figures, strange scuff marks on floors, handprints too large and shaped wrong pressed into dust, the lingering smell of ozone and something else, something organic and unpleasant. By the time the sun came up, Calhoun had photographed everything and taken detailed notes. He had enough evidence to prove that something was happening in Wardell County, something that had been happening for decades, but he still didn't know what it was or how to stop it. They were sitting in the truck parked behind an old grain elevator as the sky lightened when Toll spoke up. That date, October 17th, 1985. You think that's when it started? I think that's when the deal was made. But it probably started before that. Could have been going on for years, decades even, before Vaughn decided to do something about it. Do something, Toll repeated. You mean make it worse? Maybe he didn't see it that way. Maybe he thought he was protecting people, keeping something contained. Calhoun rubbed his eyes, exhaustion settling into his bones. But whatever he did, it's not holding anymore. The circles are appearing more frequently. The figures are more active. Something's changing. So, what do we do? Calhoun looked at his deputy, at the fear and determination in equal measure on Toll's face. He thought about Sheriff Vaughn, about the choices he'd made and the secrets he'd kept, about the weight of a badge and what it meant to protect people even when you didn't understand what you were protecting them from. We figure out what the deal was, Calhoun said finally, and then we break it. Calhoun spent the next 2 days buried in records, not the official files at the department. Those had already proven sanitized, scrubbed clean of anything that might point to the truth, but in the county archives, the historical society, and the dusty basement of the Wardell County Courthouse where land deeds and tax records went back to the 1800s. What he found painted a picture that made his skin crawl. Permian 6 wasn't just an abandoned oil pump station. It sat on land that had changed hands 17 times between 1892 and 1985, an unusually high turnover rate for rural Texas property. More disturbing was the pattern. Every owner either died under unusual circumstances, went bankrupt, or simply disappeared from the records entirely. The last private owner before the oil company took possession in 1972 was a rancher named Caleb Worthy, who'd hanged himself in his barn in 1971. The coroner's report listed it as suicide, but there was a note stapled to the back of the file in what looked like the coroner's handwriting. Victim showed signs of severe malnutrition and dehydration despite adequate food-water on property. Appeared to have stopped eating weeks prior to death. No explanation. The oil company, Permian Basin Petroleum, LLC, had operated the station for 15 years before the price crash of 1987 forced them into bankruptcy. During that time, 3 workers had died in accidents at the site. 1 fell from the derrick. 1 was crushed by equipment. 1 simply disappeared during a night shift. His truck found parked at the site, but no trace of the man himself. All 3 deaths occurred in October. All 3 occurred after dark. And all 3 happened between October 15th and October 20th. Calhoun sat back in his chair in the courthouse basement, surrounded by photocopied records and handwritten notes, and felt the pieces clicking into place. October 17th, 1985, the date of the suspended traffic stop, the date written on the walls of the Cotton Gin, fell right in the middle of that window. Whatever happened at Permian 6, whatever Sheriff Vaughn had encountered that night, it was part of a pattern that went back at least a century. His phone buzzed. A text from Toll. "Need you at the office, now. Don't use radio." Calhoun gathered his notes, stuffed them into a folder, and drove back to the sheriff's department. He found Toll waiting in his office with the door closed, his face pale and drawn. "What happened?" Calhoun asked. "We got a missing person report this morning. Elderly man named Raymond Keller lives alone about 3 miles from the old Cotton Gin. His daughter went to check on him this morning and found his house empty. Door wide open, coffee still warm on the stove. No sign of a struggle, no note, just gone." Calhoun felt his stomach drop. When did she last talk to him? Yesterday evening, around 7. She called to remind him about a doctor's appointment today. Toll paused. "Sheriff, I went out there to take a look. The house is clean, nothing obviously wrong, but in his garage, someone spray-painted a circle on the concrete floor. Same symbols we've been seeing." Jesus. Calhoun moved to his desk and pulled out the map they'd marked with abandoned property locations. "Show me where Keller lived." Toll pointed to a spot on the map, northwest of the Cotton Gin. When Calhoun connected it to the other locations with a pencil line, a pattern finally emerged. Not a circle or a straight line, but something else. Something that looked almost like a spiral, starting at Permian 6 and curving outward through the other sites, with Raymond Keller's house sitting right on that curved path. "It's spreading," Calhoun said quietly. "Whatever it is, it's not contained to the abandoned sites anymore. It's moving outward." Moving toward what? Calhoun traced the spiral's path with his finger. If the pattern continued, it would curve through at least a dozen more properties before completing its arc. And at the center of that arc, where the spiral would eventually close, sat the town of Lenora, population 1,200. "It's heading for population centers," he said, starting with isolated targets and working its way inward. Toll stared at the map. "How long do we have?" "I don't know. But if Raymond Keller was taken last night and the pattern holds, there'll be another disappearance within the next few days, probably someone living along this line." Calhoun drew his finger along the spiral's next curve. "We need to warn people." Warn them about what? That there are circles appearing on their property, and if they see one, they might vanish? They'll think we've lost our minds. Then we don't tell them everything. We tell them there's a safety concern in the area, recommend they stay with family or friends for a few days while we investigate. Calhoun stood and grabbed his jacket. "Start making a list of every occupied property within a mile of this line. I'll call the state police and request additional patrols." And then what? Calhoun looked at his deputy, at the fear and determination in his eyes, and made a decision that would either save lives or end his career. "Then we go back to Permian 6. Tonight. And we end this." They left at town just after sunset, taking Calhoun's truck and bringing more equipment this time. Flashlights, road flares, a digital camera, and Toll's personal shotgun loaded with buckshot. Calhoun didn't think the shotgun would do any good against the figures they'd seen. You couldn't shoot something that appeared and disappeared at will. but it made Toll feel better, and that was worth something. The drive to Permian 6 took 40 minutes through the gathering darkness. Neither man spoke much. They both knew what they were doing was probably foolish, possibly dangerous, and definitely outside any reasonable interpretation of their duties as law enforcement. But they also knew that whatever was happening in Wardell County, it had been allowed to fester for 38 years because good men had looked the other way. Calhoun wasn't going to make the same mistake. They parked on the rise above the pump station, in the same spot where Calhoun had stopped on his first visit. The compound lay below them in the twilight, the pump house and derrick casting long shadows across the ground. Nothing moved, no lights, no sounds except the wind. "What's the plan?" Toll asked as they climbed out of the truck. "We go in, we find the circle in the pump house, and we destroy it. Physically break up the concrete if we have to. Remove whatever's letting these things through. You think that'll work?" "I think it's the only play we have." Calhoun checked his weapon, then started down the slope. "Stay close. If you see those figures, don't try to engage. We're not here to fight. We're here to close a door." They crossed the collapsed fence and approached the pump house. The front door hung open, just as Calhoun had left it. He swept his flashlight across the interior before entering. The circle was still there in the center of the room, the symbols carved deep into the concrete. But something was different. The air inside the building felt charged, electric, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. "Sheriff," Toll said quietly, "you hear that?" Calhoun went still and listened. At first, he heard nothing but the wind outside. Then, faintly, he picked it up. A sound like humming. Not mechanical, but not quite human either. It was coming from deeper in the building, from the storage room where he'd seen the floating radio. "Come on," Calhoun said, moving toward the back of the pump house. They reached the storage room and Calhoun pushed the door open. The room was as he remembered it. Bare concrete walls and floor, but the radio was gone. Instead, in the center of the room, the air itself seemed to shimmer and distort, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. And through that distortion, Calhoun could see something else. Not the storage room's back wall, but a different space entirely. Dark, vast, filled with shapes that moved with that same wrong, gliding motion he'd seen before. "Holy God," Toll whispered. "What is that?" "It's what they come through," Calhoun said. "It's the door." The humming sound grew louder, and the distortion began to expand, spreading across the room like water soaking into fabric. Calhoun could feel it pulling at him, a gentle but insistent tug that made him want to step forward, to move closer, to see what lay beyond that impossible threshold. He forced himself to back away. "We need to break the circle, now." They ran back to the main room. Toll swung his shotgun like a club, smashing the butt against the concrete inside the circle. The impact jarred his hands and arms, but the concrete didn't crack. He tried again, harder, and again nothing. The symbols seemed to absorb the force, spreading it out across the surface. "It's not working," Toll said, his voice tight with panic. Calhoun looked around the pump house searching for something, anything they could use. His eyes fell on a pile of debris in the corner. Old pipes, rusted metal, pieces of broken equipment. He grabbed a length of steel pipe about 4 feet long and heavy enough to serve as a pry bar. "Move," he told Toll, then drove the pipe into the concrete at the circle's edge. The pipe skated off the surface. He tried again, angling it differently, putting his full weight behind it. This time, he felt something give. A hairline crack appeared in the concrete running from the circle's edge toward its center. The humming sound from the storage room suddenly rose in pitch, becoming almost a shriek. The lights, what few still worked in the pump house, began to flicker. And Calhoun felt the temperature drop, the air going from cool to cold to frigid in the space of seconds. "Keep going," Toll said, grabbing another piece of pipe and joining Calhoun's efforts. Together, they pounded at the circle's edge, widening the crack, breaking through the carved symbols. The concrete began to fracture, chunks of it breaking away to reveal the dark earth beneath. That's when the figures appeared. They materialized out of the shadows, 3 of them, then 5, then more. They surrounded the circle, standing perfectly still, watching. Calhoun could feel their attention like physical weight, cold and alien and utterly without mercy. Up close, he could see details he'd missed before. Their skin, if it was skin, had a texture like old leather. Their faces were smooth and featureless except for dark hollows where eyes should have been. And their hands had too many fingers, long and thin and wrong. "Don't stop," Calhoun gasped, bringing the pipe down again. Another chunk of concrete broke away. The circle was maybe a third destroyed now, the symbols disrupted and incomplete. The figures didn't move to stop them. They just watched. And somehow that was worse than if they'd attacked. It suggested patience, confidence, the certainty that no matter what Calhoun and Toll did, it wouldn't matter in the end. But Calhoun kept swinging, kept breaking, kept destroying the circle piece by piece. Toll worked beside him, both men grunting with effort, sweat pouring down their faces despite the frigid air. The pile of broken concrete grew. The circle shrank. And then, with a final impact that sent shockwaves up Calhoun's arms, the last section of the circle shattered. For a moment, nothing happened. The figures remained motionless. The humming continued. Then, all at once, the sound cut off. The temperature began to rise, and the figures started to fade, becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone entirely. The sudden silence was deafening. Calhoun and Toll stood in the middle of the pump house, surrounded by broken concrete, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The air no longer felt charged. The oppressive sense of being watched had lifted. Whatever doorway had existed here, it was closed now. "Is it over?" Toll asked. Calhoun wanted to say yes. He wanted to believe that breaking one circle would be enough. But he remembered the map, the spiral pattern, the other sites scattered across the county. "This one's closed," he said. "But there are more, a lot more. Then we close them all." "Yeah." Calhoun looked at his deputy, saw the determination there, and felt something like pride. "Yeah, we do." They were turning to leave when Calhoun noticed something in the rubble. A piece of paper, yellowed and brittle, that had been buried beneath the concrete. He picked it up carefully and unfolded it. It was a handwritten note, dated October 17th, 1985. "To whoever finds this, I made a choice tonight. A terrible choice. They came through the circle during a traffic stop, took the driver before I could stop them. Said they'd been feeding here for decades, taking 1 or 2 when the season was right. Said they'd take more, as many as they wanted, unless I gave them permission to continue on their terms. 1 person every October. In exchange, they'd leave the rest alone. I gave them what they wanted. God forgive me, I gave them what they wanted. I thought I was saving lives, protecting the county. Now I don't know. I don't know if I made a deal or just taught them we'd let them take whatever they wanted if they scared us enough. If you're reading this, it means the deal has broken. They're taking more again. You need to destroy all the circles, every last one. It's the only way to close the doors completely. Sheriff Horace Vaughn. Calhoun read the note twice, then folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. Vaughn had known, had understood what he was doing, and had done it anyway, trading 1 life a year for the illusion of safety. "What's it say?" Toll asked. It says we have work to do. They spent the next 3 hours hitting every site they'd marked on the map. The cotton gin, the Texaco station, the abandoned ranch house, the meat packing plant. At each location they found circles and destroyed them, breaking through concrete and tile and packed earth until the symbols were obliterated and the carved lines rendered meaningless. At some sites, they saw the figures. At others, the locations were empty, already abandoned by whatever had been using them. But at every site, once the circles were broken, the air changed. The oppressive weight lifted. The sense of wrongness faded. By 3 in the morning, they'd cleared 11 of the 12 marked locations. Only one remained, a small abandoned church on County Road 1205, about 5 miles from Lenora. According to the land records Calhoun had pulled, the church had been deconsecrated in 1984 after the congregation disbanded. The building had sat empty ever since. They pulled up to the church as the first hint of dawn grayed the eastern sky. It was a simple structure, white clapboard with a small steeple and boarded-up windows. The front doors were chained shut, but one of the side windows had been broken out, providing easy access. Calhoun and Toll climbed through the window into what had once been the sanctuary. Pews still stood in crooked rows, covered in dust and bird droppings. The altar at the front was bare except for a rusted cross lying on its side. And in the center of the floor, right where the aisle split the pews, was the largest circle they'd seen yet. Maybe 15 feet in diameter, with symbols so densely packed that they seemed to writhe and shift in the beam of Calhoun's flashlight. "This is the main one," Calhoun said quietly. "This is where it started." They approached the circle carefully. Unlike the others, this one hadn't been carved or painted. The symbols appeared to be burned into the wood floor, blackened and deep, as if someone had pressed white-hot brands against the planks. And at the circle's center was something that made Calhoun's blood run cold. A photograph, old and faded, showing a man in a sheriff's uniform. Sheriff Vaughn, younger than Calhoun remembered him, standing in front of this very church. And on the back of the photograph, written in the same hand as the note they'd found at Permian 6, October 17th, 1985, the night I sold my soul. "Sheriff," Toll said, his voice tight, "we're not alone." Calhoun looked up. The church was filled with them now, dozens of the figures standing between the pews, lining the walls, crowding the space around the altar. More than he'd seen at all the other sites combined. They stood in perfect silence, watching with those hollow, eyeless faces. And at the front of the church, standing on the altar, was something different. Larger, more solid. It wore the rough approximation of a man's form, but there was an authority to it, a presence that the others lacked. A leader, or something worse. When it spoke, the voice filled the church, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You have broken our passages, destroyed our marks, ended the agreement." Calhoun raised his weapon, knowing it was useless but needing something to hold on to. The agreement was made under duress. It's over. The agreement was made freely. Your predecessor understood the alternative. You take one, or we take many. That was the bargain. "No bargain," Calhoun said. "Not anymore." The figure tilted its head, the motion eerily bird-like. "Then we will take what we want. Starting with your town, your people. We have been patient. We have been restrained. No longer." Toll raised his shotgun. "Like hell you will." "One question," Calhoun said quickly, before violence could erupt. "Why here? Why this county? Why any of this?" The figure was silent for a long moment. Then, "This place is thin. The barriers between are weak. We have always been here, in the spaces behind, feeding when we can. Your people built over our paths, sealed them with symbols and prayers and fear. But fear fades, prayers go unanswered, and symbols can be redrawn to open what was closed. Then we'll close them again, and again, as many times as it takes. You cannot. You are one man. We are legion. We are patient. We are eternal. Calhoun looked at the circle, at the dense pack of symbols, at the photograph of Vaughn lying at its center. He thought about the choice Vaughn had made, the terrible calculus of trading one life for many. And he thought about Raymond Keller, about the 3 oil workers, about Caleb Worthy and all the others who disappeared over the decades, taken by things that lived in the spaces behind and fed on human fear. Maybe I can't stop you forever, Calhoun said, but I can stop you today. He stepped forward, planted his boot in the center of the circle, and brought the steel pipe down with all his strength. The floor splintered with a sound like a gunshot. He struck again and again, breaking through the burned symbols, destroying the pattern that had stood here for decades or longer. The figures shrieked, an awful, inhuman sound that made Calhoun's ears ring and his teeth ache. They surged forward, reaching for him with those 2 long fingers, but Toll was there, swinging his shotgun like a club, driving them back. The blessed wood of the church pews seemed to repel them, forcing them to flow around the furniture like water around stones. Calhoun kept smashing, kept breaking, kept destroying. He could feel something pushing back now, a resistance that was more than just physical. The floor itself seemed to fight him, the wood becoming harder, denser, as if it didn't want to break. But he kept swinging, putting everything he had into each impact. And then, with a final strike that sent splinters flying and opened a gap in the floor wide enough to see the ground beneath, the circle shattered completely. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The figures began to dissolve, their forms coming apart like smoke in a strong wind. They reached for Calhoun and Toll with desperate, grasping hands, but their fingers passed through flesh without connecting, incorporeal and powerless. Even the large figure on the altar was breaking apart, fragmenting into 1,000 pieces of shadow that dispersed into the air. Its voice came one last time, distant and fading. This place is thin. We will always find a way back. Always. Then it was gone. They were all gone. The church stood empty and silent except for the sound of Calhoun's and Toll's heavy breathing. They stood there for a long time, waiting to see if anything else would happen. But the dawn light coming through the broken windows showed only an empty, decaying building. No figures, no circles, no sense of wrongness or watching eyes. "Is it over?" Toll asked again. This time, Calhoun nodded. "For now, yeah, I think it is." The sun was full up by the time Calhoun and Toll made it back to town. They drove in silence, both men too exhausted to speak, too wired to sleep. The truck's radio played low, some country station out of Midland, but neither of them was really listening. They were listening instead to the absence of sound, waiting for something that never came. No radio static, no voices from empty frequencies, just the ordinary morning noise of a small West Texas town waking up. Calhoun dropped Toll off at his apartment on the east side of Lenora with instructions to get some sleep and keep his phone on. Then he drove to his own house, a small ranch-style place on 3 acres at the edge of town that he'd bought after his divorce 15 years ago. He sat in the driveway for a long time, engine idling, staring at the front door and trying to remember what normal felt like. Inside, everything was exactly as he'd left it. Coffee cup in the sink. Yesterday's newspaper on the kitchen table. The thermostat set to 72. But something felt different, and it took Calhoun a moment to realize what it was. The house felt empty in a way it never had before. Not just devoid of people, but hollow. like the walls were thinner than they'd been, the spaces between rooms larger and darker. He shook his head, chalking it up to exhaustion and stress. He'd been awake for almost 36 hours, spent most of the night breaking concrete and confronting things that shouldn't exist. Of course, everything felt wrong. He needed food, a shower, and about 12 hours of sleep, in that order. But first, he needed to check on Raymond Keller. The Keller house sat at the end of a dirt road that wound through mesquite and prickly pear for about 2 miles before dead-ending at a weathered single story with a sagging porch and a detached garage. Calhoun had been out here yesterday with Toll, but in daylight the property looked different, less ominous. Just an old man's house, showing the neglect that came when there was nobody left to care about upkeep. He parked in the driveway and walked to the front door. It was still unlocked, hanging slightly ajar the way Keller's daughter had left it. Calhoun pushed it open and stepped inside. "Mr. Keller? Sheriff's Department. Anyone home?" No answer. He moved through the house methodically, checking each room. The kitchen was clean, dishes washed and put away. The living room showed signs of recent use, a book lying open on the side table, reading glasses folded on top of it. The bedroom was made up military tight, the kind of precision that spoke to old habits dying hard. In the garage, the circle was still there, spray-painted in that same angular script they'd seen at all the other sites. But something was different. Calhoun crouched down and ran his hand across the concrete. The paint was dry but recent, maybe a day old. And in the center of the circle, barely visible unless you were looking for it, was a darker stain. Rust brown. The size and shape of a man lying on his back. Calhoun stood quickly, his hand dropping to his weapon. He scanned the garage. Old tools, a workbench, cardboard boxes stacked against the far wall, but saw nothing out of place. The stain could have been oil, could have been paint thinner, could have been a dozen things that had nothing to do with Raymond Keller's disappearance. But Calhoun didn't think so. He took photographs with his phone, then searched the rest of the property. The garage, the shed, the overgrown yard. He found nothing. No sign of Keller, no evidence of what had happened to him, just the circle and the stain and the oppressive feeling that he was being watched from somewhere he couldn't see. As he was walking back to his truck, his phone rang. Toll. "Sheriff, we got another one." Calhoun felt his stomach drop. Another what? Missing person. Woman named Patricia Simmons. Lives out on County Road 1218. Her son went to check on her this morning and found the house empty. Same as Keller, door open, coffee on the stove, no sign of struggle. Any circles? I'm heading out there now. I'll let you know. Calhoun looked back at the Keller house, at its dark windows and sagging porch. They'd broken all the circles, destroyed every site they'd found. So why were people still disappearing? "I'll meet you there," he said, and climbed into his truck. The Simmons house was 12 miles northwest of Keller's place, sitting on a small plot of land that bordered BLM property. It was newer than Keller's, a manufactured home with vinyl siding and a gravel driveway. Toll's cruiser was already parked out front when Calhoun arrived, along with a silver Honda that probably belonged to the son. He found them in the backyard. Toll, and a heavy-set man in his 40s who was pacing back and forth and talking in rapid, panicked bursts. "I called her last night around 8. She was fine, said she was going to watch her programs and go to bed. And then this morning, I come by to take her to her doctor's appointment, and the door's just hanging open, and she's gone." "Mr. Simmons," Calhoun said gently, "I'm Sheriff Calhoun. I need you to take a breath and tell me when you last saw your mother in person." The man turned to him, face flushed and eyes wet. 2 days ago. I live in Midland. I come out here every week to check on her. She was fine. I'm sure she was. Now, has your mother had any—" "Sheriff," Toll's voice cut across the yard, low and urgent. He was standing near a small storage shed, looking at the ground. "You need to see this." Calhoun excused himself and walked over. On the concrete pad in front of the shed, someone had spray-painted a circle. Same symbols, same angular script, but this one was different. It wasn't complete. The line stopped about 3/4 of the way around, as if whoever had been drawing it had been interrupted, or had run out of time. "It's not finished," Toll said quietly. "No, it's not." Calhoun crouched down and studied the incomplete circle. The symbols inside were fewer than at the other sites, the pattern less dense. But it was still enough. Enough for what? To mark her, to let them know she was available. Toll was quiet for a moment. Then, "Sheriff, we destroyed all the circles, every single one. How are they still taking people?" It was the question Calhoun had been asking himself since Toll's call. The circles were gone, the doors were closed. The figures had dissolved into nothing when he'd broken the last symbol in the church. By every measure, they'd won. They'd ended whatever Vaughn had started 38 years ago. So why did it feel like they'd only made things worse? "I don't know," he said, finally. "But we need to figure it out, fast." By the end of the day, 2 more people had been reported missing. An elderly man named Thomas Pritchard, who lived alone on a farm near the county line, and a middle-aged woman named Sarah Denton, a librarian in Lenora who'd failed to show up for her shift at the public library. Both had circles on their property, both incomplete. Calhoun called an emergency meeting at the sheriff's office with his entire department, all 7 of them, including Toll and Marlene at dispatch. He stood in front of the county map, now covered in red marks that showed every confirmed disappearance, and tried to explain what they were dealing with without sounding insane. "Over the past 3 days, we've had 4 people go missing from their homes under suspicious circumstances," he said. "No signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle. In each case, we've found markings on the property that suggest the victim was targeted." "What kind of markings?" asked Deputy Luther Banks, a 20-year veteran who'd worked under 3 different sheriffs. "Spray-painted circles with symbols inside. We don't know who's making them or why, but there's a pattern. All 4 victims lived alone in isolated areas. All 4 were last seen after dark, and all 4 disappeared sometime between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. "Serial killer?" asked Deputy Angela Morris, the department's youngest officer. "Maybe, or maybe a group. We're working with state police to develop a profile." It was a lie, but a necessary one. Calhoun couldn't tell his deputies the truth, that they were dealing with something that didn't fit any profile, something that came from spaces behind and fed on whatever it took. They'd have him removed from duty within the hour. "What do you need from us?" Banks asked. "Increased patrols in the western half of the county, particularly around isolated properties. I want every house within 10 miles of the disappearance sites checked at least once per shift. If you see any spray-painted markings, you report them immediately and do not approach. Understood?" Nods all around. Calhoun dismissed them and returned to his office, where Toll was waiting with fresh coffee and a grim expression. "You think more patrols will help?" the deputy asked. "No, but it'll make people feel safer. And right now, that's about all we can do. There has to be something else, some way to stop this." Calhoun pulled out the note he'd found at Permian 6, Sheriff Vaughn's confession written in fading ink. He read it again, looking for something he'd missed, some detail that might explain why breaking the circles hadn't ended the disappearances. And then he saw it. One line near the end. "If you're reading this, it means the deal has broken." Not if the deal breaks, not when the deal ends, but has broken, past tense, as if the breaking had already happened by the time Vaughn wrote the note. "Son of a bitch," Calhoun whispered. What? Vaughn knew. He knew the deal wouldn't hold. That's why he left the note. Calhoun stood and paced to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. The circles weren't the deal. They were just markers. Way stations. The deal was something else. What kind of deal? One that required sacrifice. One person every October, voluntarily given. That's what kept them contained. Calhoun turned back to Toll. But we broke the circles, destroyed the markers, and now they're taking whoever they want, however many they want, because there's nothing left to restrain them. The implications hung in the air between them. They hadn't ended the threat. They'd unleashed it. So, what do we do? Toll asked quietly. Calhoun looked at the map, at the red marks spreading across Wardell County like a rash. 4 people gone in 3 days. How many more would disappear before they figured out how to stop it? How many more before the things from the spaces behind decided to move on from isolated farmhouses and start taking people from town? We go back to the source, he said. Back to where it started. And we find out what Vaughn really did that night in 1985. They returned to Permian 6 as the last light was draining from the western sky. The pump station looked the same as always, rusted, abandoned, forgotten. But Calhoun could feel the difference now. The air was thicker here, harder to breathe. The darkness seemed to gather more quickly, pooling in the shadows between buildings like standing water. They'd brought equipment this time. A metal detector borrowed from a hobbyist in town. Ground-penetrating radar that Toll had requisitioned from the county engineering department. And Calhoun's father's old Bible, leather-bound and heavy, with passages marked in fading pencil. He wasn't a religious man, but he'd grown up in West Texas, and he knew that sometimes faith mattered more than firepower. "What are we looking for?" Toll asked as they set up the radar near the pump house. "I don't know. A burial site, maybe. Something Vaughn left behind that explains what he really did here." They spent 2 hours scanning the compound. The radar showed the expected underground features: old pipes, foundation footings, the contaminated wellhead, but nothing unusual. Nothing that looked like a grave, or a cache, or anything else that might hold answers. They were about to give up when the metal detector started beeping near the base of the old derrick. Calhoun swept it back and forth, pinpointing the signal to a spot about 3 feet from the derrick's southern leg. He and Toll grabbed shovels from the truck and started digging. 18 inches down, they hit metal. A box, military green, about the size of a shoebox. Calhoun lifted it carefully and set it on the ground. No lock, just a simple latch corroded with rust. He opened it. Inside were 3 items: a sheriff's badge, tarnished and bent, a photograph showing 7 people standing in front of the pump house, workers maybe, or company representatives, and a ledger, pocket-sized, with entries written in cramped handwriting. Calhoun opened the ledger. The first entry was dated October 15, 1947. Took J. Morrison as agreed, no trouble. They were satisfied. The second entry, October 17, 1952. Took R. Sanderson. Fought some. Had to be restrained. Deal holds. There were more entries, dozens of them spanning decades. Different handwriting, different names, but always the same dates in October. Always the same phrase. Deal holds. The last entry was dated October 17, 1985, written in what Calhoun now recognized as Sheriff Vaughn's hand. Took transient, John Doe, no ID. They came through angry. Said the old families are dying. No one left who remembers the deal. No one left who will volunteer. This is the last time. After this, they take what they want. Deal broken. Calhoun read it 3 times, his hands shaking. The old families. The ones who'd settled here in the 1800s, who'd built their ranches and their churches on land that was already thin, already weak. They'd known about the things in the spaces behind, had made accommodations, had offered sacrifice, one person every October, someone who wouldn't be missed, in exchange for being left alone. But the old families were gone now, dead or moved away or diluted through generations of marriage and migration. And with them went the memory of the deal, the understanding that some debts never expired, only compounded. Vaughn had tried to maintain it, had thought he could keep the bargain alive by continuing the sacrifices, but you couldn't volunteer someone else. That wasn't how deals worked, not with things like this. The sacrifice had to be willing, had to be given freely. And now, because there was no one left who understood that, the things from behind were taking whatever they wanted. "Sheriff," Toll said quietly, "look at the photograph." Calhoun picked it up and studied it more carefully. 7 people standing in front of the pump house. Sometime in the 1940s, based on their clothes and the photograph's quality. 3 men in work clothes, 2 women in dresses, and 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 10 and 12 years old. On the back of the photo, someone had written names: Morrison, Sanderson, Keene, Worthy, Pritchard, Keller, Denton. The last 5 names hit Calhoun like a fist to the gut. Worthy, Pritchard, Keller, Denton. The same names as 4 of the people who disappeared or died over the years. Raymond Keller, Thomas Pritchard, Sarah Denton, Caleb Worthy, who'd hanged himself in 1971. "They're targeting descendants," he said. "The families who made the original deal, they're going after their bloodlines. Why? Because the debt passes down. Because the deal was made by these families. And even if the current generation doesn't know about it, they're still responsible." Calhoun looked up at Toll. "We need to find anyone in the county with these last names. Warn them. Get them out of here before—" The sound cut him off. That familiar humming, starting low and building, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Calhoun spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and saw them emerging from the shadows. Not 3 or 5 this time. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. More than he'd seen even in the church. They filled the compound, standing shoulder to shoulder in perfect silence, surrounding the derrick where Calhoun and Toll stood with the metal box and its revelations. And at the front of the crowd, the large figure from the church, the leader, the speaker. It glided forward until it was maybe 20 feet away, close enough that Calhoun could see the wrongness of its form in detail, the way its limbs bent at joints that shouldn't exist, the way its head sat at an angle that would have broken a human neck. "You understand now," it said, that voice coming from everywhere. "You see what was done, what must be paid." "The families are gone," Calhoun said. "The people who made the deal are dead. Their descendants don't even know about it. Ignorance is not absolution. The debt remains. We will collect. Then take me." The words were out before Calhoun could stop them, but once spoken he knew they were right. Knew they were the only option left. "I'm the sheriff. It's my job to protect this county. Let the others go. Take me instead." "Abner, no," Toll started, but Calhoun cut him off with a look. The figure tilted its head, considering. "You would offer yourself? Freely?" "Yes. Why?" "Because that's what the badge means. Because I'm not going to make the same mistake Vaughn did. Trading other people's lives for my own peace. You want a sacrifice? I'm giving you one. Willing. Voluntary. The way the original deal required." The figure was silent for a long time. The other figures around it remained motionless, waiting. Calhoun could hear his own heartbeat, could feel Toll's hand on his arm, pulling him back, but he didn't move. This was the only way. The only way to close the door that Vaughn had opened, to pay the debt that had been accumulating for decades. Finally, the figure spoke. One life for many. A sheriff for a county. This is acceptable. But know this, Abner Calhoun. You will not die. Death is a mercy we do not grant. You will go into the spaces behind, and there you will remain feeding us, sustaining us, until the debt is fully paid, which will be never. I understand. Abner, don't do this, Toll said, his voice breaking. There has to be another way. There isn't. Calhoun turned to his deputy, saw the fear and grief in his face, and managed something like a smile. You're a good cop, Toll, better than me. You'll make a good sheriff. I don't want to be sheriff. I want you to take the box, take the ledger. Make sure people know what happened here. Make sure they remember. Calhoun handed over his badge, his weapon, his truck keys. And if anyone else goes missing, if this doesn't work, you burn this whole place to the ground. You understand me? Burn it down and salt the earth. Toll took the items with shaking hands. I'll find you. I'll figure out how to bring you back. No, you'll protect this county. That's the job now. Calhoun turned back to the figure. I'm ready. The figure raised one of its two long arms, and the circle of watching entities parted, creating a path. Beyond them, the air began to shimmer and distort, that same heat wave effect Calhoun had seen in the pump house storage room. But this time he could see through it more clearly, could see the space beyond, dark and vast and wrong in ways that made his eyes hurt and his mind recoil. He took a step forward, then another. Behind him, he heard Toll calling his name, but the sound seemed to come from very far away, as if Calhoun was already halfway gone. The shimmer grew closer, larger, until it filled his vision. He could feel it pulling at him now, stronger than before, insistent and undeniable. He took one last look back at Permian 6, at Toll standing alone with the metal box and Calhoun's badge, at the West Texas night sky full of stars. Then he stepped forward into the distortion and let it take him. Deputy Tolliver Greer was promoted to sheriff of Wardell County 3 weeks later, after Abner Calhoun was officially declared missing in the line of duty. The disappearances stopped. Raymond Keller, Patricia Simmons, Thomas Pritchard, and Sarah Denton were never found, but no one else went missing. No more circles appeared on properties. The abandoned sites stayed abandoned. Toll filed a report stating that Sheriff Calhoun had disappeared while investigating the missing persons cases at Permian 6. The state police conducted a perfunctory investigation but found no evidence of foul play. Just another unsolved case in a county full of them. But Toll kept the metal box, kept the ledger, kept Calhoun's badge in his desk drawer where he could see it every day. And once a month, on nights when the wind came from the west and the air felt thin, he drove out to Permian 6. He never went inside the pump house, never crossed the collapsed fence. He just parked on the rise where Calhoun had parked that first night, and he sat in his truck with the engine running, and he watched. Sometimes, in the hour before dawn, he thought he saw movement down there. A tall figure standing near the derrick. Or maybe two figures, one tall and wrong, one human-shaped but somehow diminished. And sometimes, when the wind was right, he thought he heard a voice calling from very far away, saying words he couldn't quite make out. But he never went down to investigate, never tried to break the circle that had been drawn in Calhoun's blood, the final seal on the deal that had bought Wardell County its peace. Because he understood what Calhoun had understood, that some debts could only be paid one way and some doors could only be locked from the inside. On October 17th of each year, Toll drove out to Permian 6 and left something at the base of the rise. Calhoun's favorite brand of coffee, a bottle of good bourbon, once a photograph of the department, all of them smiling at some forgotten barbecue. Small offerings, small remembrances, and every year, by morning, the offerings were gone. The county stayed safe. The disappearances never resumed. And Sheriff Tolliver Greer served Wardell County for the next 30 years, never marrying, never leaving, never forgetting the night his predecessor had walked into the spaces behind and bought them all time with his own damnation. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind blew from the west and the darkness felt too deep, Toll would wake up and hear it, faint and distant but unmistakable. The sound of a radio crackling to life. A voice calling through static. "Unit 7, do you copy? Unit 7, please respond." And he would lie there in the dark, clutching Calhoun's badge, and whisper the only answer he could give. "I copy, Sheriff. I copy. God help me. I still copy." Sheriff Beauregard Lyle had lived in East Texas his entire life, and he knew the piney woods the way some men knew Scripture. He knew how the light changed when you drove deep enough into the forest, how it went from yellow to green to something darker that didn't have a name. He knew the smell of pine resin mixing with red clay and standing water. He knew the sound the wind made when it moved through longleaf pines versus loblolly. And he knew that on certain nights, humid, still nights when the air hung heavy as wet wool, the forest held its breath and waited for something that never quite arrived. It was on one of those nights, a Thursday in late September, that the call came in. Beauregard, everyone called him Beau, had since he was 6 years old, was sitting in his office at the Tyler County Sheriff's Department, working his way through a stack of paperwork that seemed to breed when he wasn't looking. The office was small, wood-paneled, with a window that looked out over the parking lot and the dense wall of pines beyond. It was nearly 10 p.m., and he was the only one in the building except for the night dispatcher, a rail-thin woman named Cordelia who'd been working dispatch since before Beau was born. The radio crackled. "Sheriff, you there?" Beau reached for the handset. "Go ahead, Cordelia." "Got a call from a trucker on Highway 96. Says he found a vehicle abandoned on the shoulder about 3 miles south of the Neches River Bridge. No hazard lights, no driver, doors hanging open." Beau glanced at his watch. "He get a plate number?" "Says it's too dark, but he's worried enough to stop and check. Want me to send somebody out?" Beau thought about it. His department consisted of himself, 3 full-time deputies, and 2 part-timers who worked weekends. At this hour, only Deputy Harmon was on patrol, and he was clear on the other side of the county dealing with a domestic disturbance that would probably keep him tied up for another hour. "Negative. I'll handle it myself. Tell the trucker I'm on my way, and he can clear out if he wants." 10-4, Sheriff." Beau grabbed his jacket, his maglite, and his keys. As he was heading out, Cordelia called after him. "Sheriff, be careful out there. Something about tonight feels wrong." He paused at the door. Cordelia wasn't given to superstition or dramatics. In 30 years of dispatch work, she'd developed instincts that were usually worth listening to. What kind of wrong? She shook her head, her face troubled in the blue glow of the dispatch console. "Can't put my finger on it, just off, like the radio's picking up echoes that shouldn't be there." Beau nodded slowly. "I'll keep my eyes open." The drive south on Highway 96 took him deeper into the piney woods, away from what little civilization Tyler County had to offer. The road was 2 lanes, cracked asphalt with no shoulder to speak of, hemmed in on both sides by pine forest so dense it felt like driving through a tunnel. His headlights caught the reflective eyes of deer watching from the trees, the occasional possum scuttling across the road. The humidity was thick enough to chew. Beau had the AC running full blast, but sweat still prickled at the back of his neck. September in East Texas was like living inside someone's mouth, hot, wet, and oppressive. The storm that had been threatening all week still hadn't broken, and the air had that electric quality that preceded lightning. 3 miles south of the Neches River Bridge, he spotted the vehicle. A pickup truck, dark-colored, maybe a Chevy or a GMC, parked halfway onto the narrow shoulder with the driver's door hanging open. The trucker who'd called it in was long gone, but his rig had left deep tracks in the soft earth at the road's edge where he'd pulled off to investigate. Bo activated his light bar and pulled up behind the abandoned truck, leaving about 20 feet between vehicles. He radioed his position to Cordelia, then grabbed his flashlight and climbed out. The night wrapped around him like a wet blanket. The forest was loud with insect noise, cicadas and tree frogs creating a wall of sound that was almost painful in its intensity. But underneath that noise was something else, a stillness, an absence. Like the forest was performing for him, putting on a show of normalcy while something deeper held perfectly still. Bo approached the truck carefully, one hand on his weapon. Tyler County Sheriff's Department. Anyone in the vehicle? No response. He swept his flashlight beam across the truck's interior. The seats were empty. Keys still in the ignition, turned to the off position. The dome light was on, casting a weak yellow glow. On the passenger seat sat a thermos, a road atlas, and what looked like a church bulletin folded in half. Bo tried the driver's door, unlocked. He leaned in to get a better look, and that's when he smelled it. Pine resin. Strong enough to make his eyes water. Not the normal forest smell you got living in the piney woods, but concentrated. Almost chemical. Like someone had spilled a gallon of turpentine in the cab. He pulled back and examined the seat. There, on the worn fabric, were what looked like dark stains, sticky to the touch. He brought his fingers to his nose and confirmed it. Pine resin, thick and fresh, like it had been dripping from the ceiling. But the truck's ceiling was dry, no leaks, no damage, nothing that would explain the resin. Bo stood up and scanned the area with his flashlight. The shoulder was narrow here, barely wide enough for a vehicle to park without hanging into the road. Beyond the shoulder was a shallow ditch, and beyond that, the forest began. A solid wall of pine trunks disappearing into darkness. He was about to call in his findings when his flashlight beam caught something at the forest edge. Footprints. Boot prints, pressed deep into the soft earth at the base of the ditch, leading into the trees. Bo hesitated. Protocol said to wait for backup when investigating a potentially dangerous situation. But backup was 40 minutes away at best, and whoever had left this truck might be injured, lost, or in trouble. He couldn't just stand here and wait while someone might be dying 50 yards into the woods. He keyed his radio. "Cordelia, I've got an abandoned vehicle with possible signs of distress. I'm going to follow some tracks into the woods, see if I can locate the driver. Mark my position and stand by." "Copy that, Sheriff. Want me to send Deputy Harmon your way?" "Affirmative. But tell him to take his time. Probably just someone who went to take a leak and got turned around." He didn't believe that, and from the tone of Cordelia's acknowledgement, neither did she. Bo crossed the ditch and entered the forest. The temperature dropped immediately, maybe 10 degrees, as if the trees were holding on to cooler air from hours ago. The insect noise that had been so loud on the road cut off abruptly, replaced by the kind of silence that made your ears ring. The boot prints were easy to follow. They led in a more or less straight line, heading northeast, away from the road. Whoever had made them had been in a hurry. The prints were deep, spaced far apart, like someone running. Every 10 yards or so, Bo found more pine resin, this time on the ground. Droplets of it, sticky and amber-colored in his flashlight beam, marking a trail deeper into the woods. He'd been following the tracks for maybe 5 minutes when he realized the trees were wrong. Not wrong in an obvious way, not dead or diseased or out of place, just arranged differently than they should be. The spacing was too regular, like someone had planted them in rows. And the trunks were all roughly the same diameter, all roughly the same height. But these were old-growth pines, had to be at least 80 years old based on their size. Old growth didn't come in uniform rows. It grew wild, chaotic, fighting for light and space. Yet here they stood, perfectly spaced, perfectly uniform, stretching away in all directions like the columns of some vast natural cathedral. Bo stopped walking and turned in a slow circle, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The boot prints continued ahead, but he found himself reluctant to follow them any further. Something about this place felt fundamentally wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. That's when he heard it. A sound like wind chimes, delicate and musical, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. But there was no wind. The air was perfectly still, so still he could hear his own breathing, his own heartbeat. The sound came again, closer this time. Not chimes. More like glass bottles clinking together. Or maybe wind moving through something hollow. Bo drew his weapon. "Sheriff's Department, identify yourself." The forest swallowed his voice, gave nothing back. The chiming sound stopped. He waited, counting his breaths, listening. 30 seconds, a minute, nothing. He was about to turn back when his flashlight caught something hanging from a branch about 20 yards ahead. Something pale and irregular, swaying slightly despite the absence of wind. He moved closer, keeping his weapon ready. It was a piece of fabric, white, or maybe cream-colored, torn into strips and tied to a pine branch about 8 feet off the ground. As Bo's light swept the area, he found more of them. Dozens of strips of cloth tied to branches all around him, hanging limp and motionless, marking the trees in some pattern he couldn't decipher. And beneath them, scratched into the bark of nearly every tree, were symbols. Not letters, not numbers, just angular marks that hurt to look at. The kind of shapes that your eye wanted to slide away from, that didn't seem to hold still when you tried to focus on them. Bo had seen a lot in his 23 years in law enforcement. He'd worked homicides, suicides, meth lab explosions, and every flavor of human tragedy the piney woods could produce. But he'd never seen anything like this. This was something else. Something that made the hair on his arms stand up and his instincts scream at him to leave now, while he still could. He backed away slowly, keeping his light on the marked trees. The boot prints continued deeper into the forest, but he wasn't following them anymore. Whoever had left that truck, whoever had walked into these woods, was either long gone or beyond his help. He was maybe 50 yards back toward the road when his radio crackled to life. But instead of Cordelia's voice, all he heard was static. Thick, white noise static that rose and fell in waves, almost like breathing. And underneath it, barely audible, something that might have been words, or might have been the forest itself, trying to speak. Bo turned the radio off. He didn't want to hear what it might say. He made it back to the road in half the time it had taken him to go in, practically running the last 100 yards. When he emerged from the trees, he stopped and bent over, hands on his knees, breathing hard. The humid air felt good now, comfortable, real. The insect noise had returned, and he'd never been so grateful for the sound of cicadas. Deputy Harmon's cruiser was pulling up behind Bo's vehicle, his light bar painting the trees blue and red. The deputy climbed out, a young man named Jackson, who'd been with the department for less than a year. "Sheriff, you okay?" Bo straightened up and nodded. Yeah, I'm fine. But we need to tape this off. Call county and get someone out here with proper lighting. Nobody goes into those woods until sunrise. Did you find the driver? No, but I found something else. Bo looked back at the forest, at the solid wall of pines that gave away nothing. We need to figure out who owns the land back there, and we need to do it fast. By the time they got the abandoned truck towed and the scene secured, it was nearly midnight. Bo sent Deputy Harmon home and drove back to the office, his mind churning through what he'd seen. The uniform trees, the fabric strips, the symbols carved into bark. And that sound, those chimes that weren't chimes that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Cordelia was still at dispatch when he walked in. She took one look at his face and poured him a cup of coffee without asking. "Bad?" she said. "Strange. Did you get anything weird on the radio while I was out there?" She frowned. "What kind of weird?" "Static, like interference. Maybe voices underneath it." "No, but like I said earlier, something's been off all night. The frequencies keep drifting, like we're picking up crosstalk from somewhere. Had 3 false alarms on the emergency line. Phone rang, but when I answered, nobody was there, just dead air." Bo sipped his coffee and tried to organize his thoughts. "I need you to pull up land records for the area south of the Neches River Bridge, specifically the forest on the east side of Highway 96, starting about 3 miles south of the bridge." "Looking for anything specific?" "Ownership, any complaints, any incidents, any reports of unusual activity in that area over the last, let's say, 20 years. Cordelia raised an eyebrow but didn't question him. She turned to her computer and started typing. While she worked, Bo walked to his office and pulled the church bulletin he'd found in the abandoned truck. He'd bagged it as evidence, though he wasn't sure evidence of what. It was from a church called Pine Hollow Community Fellowship, dated 2 Sundays ago. The cover showed a simple line drawing of a church building surrounded by pine trees. Inside was the usual church bulletin stuff, announcements about potlucks and Bible studies, a list of prayer requests, a note about upcoming revivals. But at the bottom of the last page, someone had handwritten a note in pencil. "They're in the trees. Don't go back. Don't listen when they call." Bo read it twice, then set it aside and rubbed his eyes. He was exhausted, running on too little sleep and too much coffee, and he needed to be careful not to read more into things than was actually there. The note could mean anything. Could be a joke, a reference to something he didn't understand, a message between friends that had nothing to do with abandoned trucks or marked trees. But he didn't think so. "Sheriff?" Cordelia called from the dispatch room. "I've got something." He walked back and looked over her shoulder at the computer screen. She'd pulled up a property map showing the area he'd described. Most of it was marked as private land, owned by a timber company that had gone bankrupt in the early 2000s. But there was one parcel, maybe 100 acres, that was listed differently. "What's that?" Bo asked, pointing at the highlighted section. "It's listed as restricted access, private estate, owned by someone named Juniper Kincaid. Has been since 1983. "Kincaid, that name ring any bells?" Cordelia shook her head. "Not for me. But look at this." She pulled up a different screen, this one showing complaint records. In the last 15 years, there have been 7 trespass complaints filed against various individuals, all for that property. And in every case, the complaint was filed by someone acting on behalf of Juniper Kincaid, but there's no record of law enforcement ever making contact with Kincaid directly. Who filed the complaints? Different people each time, lawyers mostly. But get this, every complaint mentions hearing sounds on the property, specifically bell-like tones or musical chiming. 3 of the 7 reports mention finding cloth tied to trees. The coffee in Bo's stomach suddenly felt like acid. What happened to the trespassers? No charges filed in any case, just warnings issued. Most of them were hunters or hikers who claimed they didn't know they were on private property. Cordelia looked up at him. "You think this Kincaid person has something to do with the abandoned truck?" "I think I need to talk to Juniper Kincaid, and I think I need to do it tomorrow morning. I can try to find contact information. Don't bother. If she's that hard to reach, I'll go see her in person." Bo finished his coffee and set the cup down. "One more thing. Can you pull the records on Pine Hollow Community Fellowship? I want to know if there's any connection between that church and the Kincaid property." Cordelia turned back to her computer. "Give me 10 minutes. While she searched, Bo went back to his office and tried to sketch out what he knew. Abandoned truck with keys in the ignition and pine resin on the seats. Boot prints leading into forest. Marked trees in an unnaturally uniform grid. Strips of cloth hanging from branches. And somewhere in all of it, a reclusive landowner named Juniper Kincaid who'd spent decades keeping people out of her property. He was missing something. Some connection that would make all of this make sense. But his brain was too tired to see it, and the more he tried to force the pieces together, the more they seemed to slip away. "Sheriff?" Cordelia appeared in his doorway. Pine Hollow Community Fellowship shut down in 2008. Building was sold to a development company, later demolished. But before it closed, there were several complaints filed by neighbors about noise disturbances. What kind of noise? Late-night services, loud singing. And this is interesting. One complaint specifically mentions bell-like sounds coming from the church property at all hours. There it was. The connection. Not complete, not enough to understand what was really happening, but enough to know that whatever he'd stumbled into tonight was bigger than an abandoned truck and some weird markings in the woods. "Where was the church located?" Bo asked. Cordelia checked her notes. "About 2 miles from the Kincaid property line, right on the edge of the forest." Bo stood up and grabbed his jacket. "I'm going home to get a few hours of sleep. First thing in the morning, you and I are going to pay a visit to Juniper Kincaid. And then we're going to figure out what the hell is happening in those woods." Bo lived alone in a small house on the north edge of town, close enough to the department that he could walk to work if he wanted to. His wife had left him 8 years ago, tired of the long hours and the weight he brought home with him, and his daughter was away at college in Austin. The house felt empty most days. But tonight he was grateful for the solitude. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon, sat in his recliner, and tried to process what he'd seen. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw those marked trees stretching away in perfect rows, and heard that sound like chimes or bells or something else entirely. His phone rang at 1:30 a.m. He grabbed it without checking the caller ID, assuming it was Cordelia with an emergency. "Sheriff Lyle?" Static, thick and heavy with something moving underneath it. Not quite words, not quite music, just sound. Organized sound like it meant something. "Hello?" Bo said. "Who is this?" The static cut off abruptly, replaced by silence. Then, very faintly, he heard it. That chiming sound coming through his phone. Coming from somewhere in the forest or somewhere else entirely. And underneath the chimes, barely audible, a voice. Male. Middle-aged. Speaking words that Bo's brain refused to process, that slid away from comprehension like water off glass. He hung up and turned the phone off. His hands were shaking. Outside, the storm that had been threatening all week finally broke. Thunder rolled across East Texas, and rain began to hammer against the windows. Bo sat in his chair and listened to the storm, and tried not to think about what was happening in the piney woods. Tried not to think about marked trees and abandoned churches, and sounds that came through phones from places that didn't exist. But he couldn't stop thinking about that voice. That barely there voice speaking words he couldn't understand. and he couldn't shake the feeling that it had been speaking directly to him. Bo didn't sleep. He tried, but every time he closed his eyes he saw those marked trees stretching away into darkness, heard that chiming sound that wasn't quite music and wasn't quite anything else. At 5:30 a.m. he gave up, showered, and made a pot of coffee strong enough to strip paint. By 6 o'clock he was back at the office, going through old records that Cordelia had pulled before she'd gone home. The files on Juniper Kincaid were sparse. A name on property deeds, signatures on trespass complaints filed by attorneys, tax records showing the land had been in her family since the 1890s. But there were no photographs, no physical descriptions, no indication of who Juniper Kincaid actually was beyond a name on legal documents. The last known address listed was a rural route number that corresponded to a road Bo knew well, Old Jasper Highway, a narrow two-lane that wound through the deepest part of the piney woods. He'd driven it maybe a dozen times over the years, always during the day, always with the uncomfortable feeling that the forest was watching him pass through. Cordelia arrived at 7, looking tired but determined. She'd brought donuts and fresh coffee, both of which Bo accepted gratefully. "I did some more digging last night after I got home," she said, spreading files across the dispatch console. "Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about those sounds you described. Find anything?" "Maybe. There's a game warden named Ransom Keating who patrols this sector. Been doing it for about 15 years. I called him this morning, asked if he knew anything about the Kincaid property. He got real quiet, then told me he'd meet us there at 9 if we wanted to talk." Bo raised an eyebrow. "He say why he got quiet?" "No, but the way he said it made me think he's seen something out there. Something that bothered him enough that he doesn't like talking about it." That was good enough for Bo. If a man who spent his days alone in the deep woods got bothered by something, it was worth paying attention to. "All right, we'll meet him at the Kincaid property gate. You know where that is?" "About 8 miles down Old Jasper Highway. There's a cattle guard and a rusted chain across a dirt road. Hard to miss if you're looking for it." "Good. We leave at 8:30. Old Jasper Highway looked different in morning light, but not better. The storm had broken sometime before dawn, leaving everything wet and dripping. Mist rose from the asphalt in lazy spirals, and the trees on both sides of the road were so thick with moisture they looked almost black. The smell of pine and wet earth was overwhelming, almost narcotic. Bo drove his personal truck, a 10-year-old Ford F-250, with Cordelia in the passenger seat. They'd gone maybe 5 miles when she spoke up. "Sheriff, you ever hear stories about this part of the woods? Old stories, I mean, the kind folks don't like to talk about." "Like what?" "My grandmother used to tell me that the piney woods used to be different. Back before the timber companies came through and clear-cut everything. She said there were places in the old forest where sounds didn't work right, where you could hear things that were happening miles away, or things that hadn't happened yet. Said the trees carried sounds through their roots, like the whole forest was one big ear listening to everything." Bo glanced at her. "You believe that?" "I didn't. But after last night..." She trailed off, looking out at the endless walls of pine. "I don't know what I believe anymore." They found the gate exactly where Cordelia had described it. A cattle guard spanned the road, and beyond it a rusted chain was strung between 2 posts with a faded "No Trespassing, Private Property" sign hanging from the center. The dirt road beyond the chain disappeared into the forest after maybe 50 yards, swallowed by the trees. A green pickup truck with Texas Parks and Wildlife markings was already parked on the shoulder. Leaning against it was a man in his 50s, lean and weathered, with the kind of tan that came from spending every day outside. He wore the standard game warden uniform, khaki shirt, green pants, boots caked with mud. Bo pulled up behind the truck and climbed out. The game warden pushed off from his vehicle and walked over, extending a hand. "Sheriff Lyle, Ransom Keating, thanks for meeting me." They shook hands. Keating had a grip like a vice and eyes that didn't miss much. He nodded at Cordelia. "Ma'am, appreciate the call this morning. Been meaning to talk to someone about this property for a while now." "What can you tell us about it?" Bo asked. Keating looked past them at the chained gate, his expression troubled. "Well, first thing you need to know is that I don't come out here anymore. Haven't set foot on Kincaid land in about 6 years, and I don't plan to ever again." "Why not?" "Because the last time I did, I saw something that made me question whether I was losing my mind. And because 2 weeks after that, I found something that made me think maybe I wasn't." Bo waited, letting the silence draw the story out. Keating seemed to be choosing his words carefully, like a man who knew how crazy he was about to sound and wanted to minimize the damage. "It was early spring," he said finally. "March, maybe April. I got a call about illegal hunting on this property. Someone had heard gunshots coming from deep in the woods. I came out here, climbed over that chain, and followed a logging road about 2 miles in." He paused. "You been on this property yet, Sheriff?" "Just the edge of it, last night." "Then you probably noticed the trees are different once you get past the property line. All the same species, all the same height, all planted in rows like some kind of grid. It's not natural. Been that way for as long as anyone can remember, but nobody knows who planted them or why." "You find the hunters?" Cordelia asked. "No, but I found something else. About 3 miles in, there's a clearing, maybe 100 yards across, perfectly circular. And in the center of that clearing is an old structure. Concrete foundation, metal framework. Looks like it might have been a radio tower or antenna of some kind. Most of it's rusted and fallen down, but you can still see what it used to be." Bo felt something cold settle in his chest. "A radio tower?" "Yeah, and get this. When I got close to it, my radio started going haywire. Static, voices, sounds that didn't make any sense. I thought maybe it was some kind of electrical interference, maybe the structure was still live somehow, but when I checked my equipment later, everything tested fine." "What kind of sounds?" Bo asked quietly. Keating met his eyes. "Chimes, bell-like tones, and underneath them something that might have been speech but in a language I didn't recognize. It was coming through my radio, but also not. Like it was coming from everywhere at once, from the trees themselves." Cordelia shifted uncomfortably. "What did you do?" "I left. Got the hell out of there and didn't look back. Made a note in my log about the structure being a potential hazard, but I didn't mention the sounds. Didn't want people thinking I'd cracked." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to Bo. 2 weeks later, I was doing a routine patrol on state land about 5 miles from here when I found this nailed to a tree." Bo unfolded the paper. It was a flyer, printed on cheap white stock, the kind you'd make on a home computer. At the top, in bold letters, Pine Hollow Community Fellowship, Final Service and Testimony. Below that, a date from 2008. And below that, a paragraph of text. "The frequency has been opened. What was bound has been loosened. We have heard the voices from the hollow places, and they have heard us. This is not salvation. This is not grace. This is the culmination of a bargain made long ago by those who should have known better. We close these doors knowing they cannot stay closed. We offer this testimony as warning. Do not seek the sounds in the trees. Do not answer when they call. The Kincaid line holds the key, and the key must never turn." The flyer was signed by someone named Pastor Virgil Lancaster, with a date of April 15, 2008, 3 days before the church had officially closed. Bo read it twice, then handed it to Cordelia. "You show this to anyone else?" "No. Didn't know what to make of it. Figured it was religious paranoia, someone who'd gotten a little too deep into end times theology." Keating shook his head. "But after what I experienced out there, I'm not so sure." "What do you know about Juniper Kincaid?" Bo asked. "Not much. She's old. Gotta be in her 80s at least. Lives alone somewhere on the property, but I've never seen her in person. Few times I've tried to make contact to discuss trespass issues. I got turned away by someone who claimed to be helping her manage the land. Big fellow, didn't talk much, made it clear I wasn't welcome." "You remember his name?" Keating thought about it. "Started with a D, I think. Dalton, Durwood, something like that." Bo looked past the game warden at the chained gate, at the dirt road disappearing into the uniform pines. He thought about the abandoned truck, about the boot prints leading into the forest, about the marked trees and the strips of cloth hanging from branches. And he thought about that voice on his phone last night, speaking words he couldn't understand. "I'm going in," he said. "This morning, I've got an abandoned vehicle situation that led me onto this property last night, and I need to follow up. But I'd appreciate anything else you can tell me before I do." Keating pulled a folded map from his truck and spread it across the hood. "Here's what I know. The main house is about 4 miles in, right here." He pointed to a spot marked with an X. "The old radio tower structure's here, about 3 miles in, southwest of the house. And there are at least a dozen smaller structures scattered across the property. Old hunting cabins, storage sheds, what might be a chapel or meeting house of some kind." "Chapel?" "Small building with a cross on top. I spotted it from a distance once, didn't get close, but it looked like it was being maintained. Fresh paint, roof in good shape. Someone's taking care of it." Bo studied the map, committing the layout to memory. "Anything else I should know?" "Yeah, don't go in after dark. And if you hear those sounds, those chimes, turn around and leave immediately. Don't try to follow them. Don't try to figure out where they're coming from." Keating's voice was serious, almost pleading. "And Sheriff, if you find whoever left that truck and they're still alive, ask them what they heard. Because I guarantee they heard something." Bo and Cordelia stood at the gate after Keating had driven away, both of them looking at the dirt road that led into Kincaid property. The morning was heating up, humidity rising as the sun burned through the mist. The forest was alive with sound now. Birds calling, insects humming, the distant rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. Normal sounds. Daytime sounds. "You don't have to come with me," Bo said. "This is probably a bad idea, and I'm not going to order you to do something this stupid." Cordelia gave him a flat look. "I've been with this department for 30 years, Sheriff. I've seen you do plenty of stupid things, and I've never let you do them alone. Not starting now." Bo almost smiled. "All right then. But we keep the radios on, we stay in sight of each other at all times, and if anything feels wrong, anything at all, we're out. Understood?" "Understood." They stepped over the chain and started up the dirt road. Within 50 yards, the world changed. The temperature dropped, the same way it had last night. The sounds of the forest faded. Not cut off, but gradually diminishing, like someone was slowly turning down the volume. And the light changed, filtering green through the uniform pines, giving everything a subaquatic quality. The trees stood in their perfect rows on both sides of the road, trunks straight and unbranched for the first 30 feet, creating corridors that stretched away in geometric precision. Every 100 yards or so, Bo spotted one of the cloth strips Keating had mentioned, tied to branches at eye level, fluttering slightly in a breeze he couldn't feel. They'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when Cordelia stopped. "Sheriff, Look at this." She was standing at the base of one of the pines, pointing at the trunk. Carved into the bark, about chest height, were those same angular symbols Bo had seen last night. But these were older, the cuts deep and weathered, the wood around them darkened with age. "How old do you think these are?" Cordelia asked. Bo ran his fingers over the carved lines. The wood was hard, the marks settled deep. Years, maybe decades. Someone's been marking these trees for a long time. As he examined the symbol, he noticed something else. At the base of the tree, partially hidden by fallen needles, was a small pile of objects. He crouched down and brushed the needles away, revealing what looked like offerings: a pocket knife, a compass, a small Bible, a handful of coins, and a photograph in a plastic sleeve. The photograph showed a family, mother, father, 2 children, standing in front of a church. The church from the flyer, Pine Hollow Community Fellowship. Bo picked up the photograph and turned it over. On the back, written in faded ink, "The Harding Family, Easter 2007. Before we knew." "Before they knew what?" Cordelia whispered. Bo didn't answer. He was looking at the other objects scattered around the base of the tree, all of them personal items, all of them left here deliberately. Not trash, offerings, or maybe sacrifices, things given up to appease something that lived in these woods. They continued up the road, finding more marked trees, more small collections of objects at their bases. And the farther they went, the more Bo felt like they were being watched. Not by people. He would have spotted people. This was something else. A sense of attention from the forest itself, like the trees were aware of their passage and were waiting to see what they would do. After about 45 minutes, the road opened into a clearing. And in the center of the clearing, exactly as Keating had described, stood the remains of the radio tower. It was bigger than Bo had expected. The concrete foundation was maybe 20 feet square, cracked and overgrown with vines. Rising from it were the twisted remains of a metal framework, rusted red-orange, that had once supported some kind of antenna array. Most of the structure had collapsed, but enough remained to suggest it had been substantial, maybe 60 feet tall when intact. Scattered around the foundation were the remnants of other equipment. Metal cabinets with their doors hanging open. Empty now, but showing signs of having once held electronics. Thick cables snaking across the ground, their insulation long since rotted away. What might have been a small generator housing, empty except for oil stains on the concrete pad. "What was this place?" Cordelia asked. Bo approached the foundation carefully, watching where he stepped. Some kind of transmission station, government maybe or military. Built during the Cold War, probably. They put radio installations all over East Texas back then. Listening posts, relay stations, communications hubs. Why here, in the middle of nowhere? Because here is perfect. Isolated, surrounded by trees that could hide the antennas from ground level, but still high enough to get good radio propagation. He stopped at the edge of the foundation and looked up at the skeletal remains of the tower. What I don't understand is why someone would build all of this and then just abandon it. He was about to step onto the foundation when Cordelia grabbed his arm. "Sheriff, listen." Bo went still. For a moment he heard nothing but the wind in the pines. Then, faintly, he heard it. That sound, those chimes. They were coming from everywhere and nowhere, delicate and musical, rising and falling in patterns that almost sounded like melody, but weren't quite. And underneath them, so faint he might have been imagining it, was that voice again, speaking words that made his head hurt when he tried to focus on them. "We should go," Cordelia said, her voice tight. "Right now." But Bo was already moving toward the foundation, drawn by something he couldn't name. He needed to see what was on that concrete slab. needed to understand what this place was. He stepped onto the foundation and the world tilted. The chiming sound exploded in volume, no longer distant but immediate, surrounding him, coming from inside his own head. His radio crackled to life, static roaring from the speaker even though he hadn't keyed the mic. And through the static, clear as day, he heard Cordelia's voice, "Sheriff, get out of there, it's not safe." But Cordelia was standing 15 feet away, her mouth closed, her face pale with fear. Bo stumbled backward off the foundation, and the sounds cut off immediately. His radio went silent. The forest returned to normal, or whatever passed for normal in this place. "What just happened?" he gasped. "I don't know. But we're leaving, now." They were halfway back to the road when Bo's radio crackled again. This time, it was a real transmission. Cordelia's voice, but not the Cordelia standing next to him. This was Dispatch Cordelia, calling from the office. "Sheriff, do you copy? We've got a situation. Deputy Harmon found another abandoned vehicle on Highway 96, same location as last night's. Driver's missing. And Sheriff," she paused, "there's someone here at the office asking for you. Says her name is Juniper Kincaid. Says you've been trespassing on her property and she wants to talk." Bo and Cordelia exchanged glances. He keyed his radio. "Copy that. We're on our way back now. ETA 30 minutes. Tell Ms. Kincaid I'll be happy to speak with her." 10-4. Sheriff, be careful out there." They made it back to the gate without incident, but the entire walk, Bo felt eyes on his back. And twice, he could have sworn he heard footsteps behind them, keeping pace, but never quite catching up. When they reached Bo's truck and climbed inside, Cordelia let out a long breath. "I've lived in East Texas my whole life, and I've never felt anything like that. It's like the forest is alive. Like it's aware of us." Bo started the engine and pulled back onto Old Jasper Highway, putting distance between them and the Kincaid property. Ransom Keating was right. Something's wrong with that place, and I think Juniper Kincaid knows exactly what it is. Juniper Kincaid was waiting in Bo's office when they arrived. She sat in one of the wooden chairs across from his desk, her posture perfect, her hands folded in her lap. She was old. Keating had guessed 80s, but Bo would have put her closer to 90, with white hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that was all sharp angles and watchful eyes. She wore a simple cotton dress, dark blue, and sensible shoes that had seen better days. Standing behind her, arms crossed, was a large man in his 50s with a face like carved granite and eyes that tracked Bo's every movement. This would be the man Keating had mentioned, the one who didn't talk much and didn't like visitors. "Ms. Kincaid," Bo said, extending his hand. "I'm Sheriff Lyle. Thank you for coming in." She didn't take his hand. Instead, she looked at him with an expression that might have been amusement, or might have been something else entirely. "You were on my property this morning, Sheriff, you and your dispatcher. Walked right past the no trespassing signs like they didn't exist. I was following up on an incident from last night. An abandoned vehicle on Highway 96 with evidence suggesting the driver may have entered your property. And did you find them? No, ma'am. You won't. They're gone, just like all the others." The room went very quiet. Bo sat down slowly and gestured for Cordelia to take notes. "What others?" Juniper's expression didn't change. "People have been disappearing in these woods for 100 years, Sheriff. Maybe longer. They hear something that calls to them, and they follow it into the pines, and they never come back. Your driver's just the latest in a long line. What is it they hear? The frequency, the resonance, the sound of something that shouldn't be but is anyway, because people made it possible." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Sheriff, When you were on my property this morning, did you go near the old tower site? Bo nodded slowly. And did you hear it, the chiming? Yes. Then you're lucky to be sitting here talking to me. Most people who hear it up close don't have the strength to walk away. It gets into your head, you see, gets into your bones, starts to feel like the most beautiful thing you've ever heard. And all you want to do is find the source, find where it's coming from. And where is it coming from? Juniper smiled, but there was no warmth in it. From the hollow places, Sheriff. From the spaces between trees where sound collects and resonates and takes on a life of its own. My family's land sits on top of one of the largest resonance chambers in East Texas, a natural acoustic phenomenon where certain frequencies can be amplified and sustained almost indefinitely. The pines help. They're perfect acoustic conductors, but the real power is in the earth itself. I don't understand what this has to do with missing people. Don't you? She settled back in her chair. In 1947, the government built that radio tower on my family's land. Said they needed it for communications, for national security. My grandfather let them do it because he was patriotic and because they paid well. But what they really built was an experiment. They wanted to see if they could use the natural acoustics of the site to broadcast at frequencies that human beings shouldn't be able to hear. Frequencies that could carry for hundreds of miles, that could pass through solid matter, that could be used for things the government doesn't like to talk about. Psychological warfare, Cordelia said quietly. Subliminal broadcasting. Juniper nodded. They ran the station for 5 years, and in those 5 years, 17 people disappeared in the woods around my family's property. Hunters, hikers, locals who'd lived here all their lives. The government said it was coincidence, said there was no connection between the station and the disappearances. But my grandfather knew better. He shut down the station in 1952, made them dismantle the equipment and leave. The disappearances stopped. For a while. What changed? Pine Hollow Community Fellowship, Juniper said. Built their church right on the edge of my property in 1995. Started having services 3 times a week, and every service involved singing. Loud, sustained singing. Hymns that could last 15-20 minutes. All those voices, all those frequencies, all resonating through the pines and down into the earth. She paused. Within a year, the disappearances started again. Slower at first, 1 or 2 people every few years, but by 2007, it was happening every few months. The pastor, Lancaster, his name was, he figured out what was happening. Figured out that they were inadvertently reactivating the resonance chamber with their worship, opening doors that should have stayed closed. So they shut the church down. They tried, but by then it was too late. The frequency was established. The resonance was self-sustaining. Even without the church, even without the tower, the sounds continue, and people keep disappearing. Bo thought about the flyer Keating had shown him. The pastor said something about the Kincaid line holding the key. What did he mean? For the first time, Juniper looked uncomfortable. My family has lived on this land for 6 generations. We've learned how to coexist with the phenomenon, how to manage it. There are techniques, rituals, if you want to call them that can dampen the resonance, keep it from spreading beyond the property boundaries. It's been my responsibility since my father died in 1983. What kind of rituals? The kind that involve sacrifice, Sheriff. The kind that demand a price be paid for the silence we maintain. She stood, and the large man behind her moved forward to help, though she waved him off. You wanted to know what happened to your driver. They heard the call and followed it. By now, they're part of the resonance, part of the frequency. Their voice added to all the others. Others? Bo stood as well. You're saying there are people alive in your woods. I'm saying there are voices, Sheriff. Whether the people they belong to are alive in any sense, you'd recognize." She shook her head. "I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to." She moved towards the door, the large man trailing behind her like a shadow. At the threshold, she turned back. "If you're smart, you'll stay off my property. Forget what you saw. Forget what you heard. Let the forest keep its secrets." "I can't do that. People are missing. It's my job to find them." Juniper's expression was almost pitying. "Then you're already lost, Sheriff. You just don't know it yet. The frequency is in you now, in your head, and sooner or later it'll call you back. They always do." She left, the large man closing the door behind them. Bo and Cordelia sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Cordelia spoke. "You believe her?" "I don't know, but I know what I heard out there. And I know people are disappearing." He pulled out his phone and opened the voice recording app. "I'm going back tonight, after dark. I need to document what's happening. Need to record those sounds so someone else can hear them. Prove I'm not losing my mind." "Sheriff, that's exactly what she said not to do. I know, but I'm the sheriff of Tyler County, and that means those woods are my jurisdiction whether Juniper Kincaid likes it or not." He looked at Cordelia. "I'm not asking you to come. This one I'm doing alone." "Like hell you are." Bo spent the rest of the day preparing. He wasn't going into those woods unprepared, not after what he'd experienced that morning. He gathered equipment: 3 high-powered flashlights with fresh batteries, a portable recording device he'd borrowed from the evidence room, rope, a first aid kit, and his service weapon with 2 extra magazines. He also printed out the map Ransom Keating had sketched, marking the location of the radio tower, the main house, and the small chapel. Deputy Harmon had processed the second abandoned vehicle, another pickup truck, this one belonging to a man named Marcus Tolliver from Lufkin. The circumstances were identical to the first. Keys in the ignition, door hanging open, pine resin on the seats, and like the first driver, Tolliver had simply vanished. His boot prints led into the forest and disappeared. By 6 p.m., Bo had made his decision. He would wait until full dark, then drive out to the Kincaid property and make his way to the radio tower on foot. If the sounds were louder at night, as he suspected they would be, he'd have a better chance of recording them. And if he could get clear audio evidence of what was happening out there, he could bring in state resources, maybe even federal help if this really was tied to an old government installation. Cordelia tried one more time to talk him out of it. "Sheriff, what Juniper Kincaid said about the frequency being in your head now, what if she's right? What if going back there is exactly what it wants you to do? Then I'll be careful. But I can't just sit here knowing there are people missing in those woods. Even if..." He trailed off. "Even if they're already dead? Even if there's something worse than dead?" "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm coming with you." "Cordelia, don't. I've made up my mind. You're not going alone, and that's final." Bo looked at her and saw the determination in her face. He knew that expression. It was the same one she'd worn 30 years ago when she'd refused to let the old sheriff dismiss a domestic violence call as just a family matter. Cordelia didn't back down when she thought something was wrong, and she wasn't backing down now. "All right," he said. "But we do this my way. We stay together. We don't split up for any reason, and the second something feels wrong, we're out. No heroics, no investigating strange sounds. We record what we can, and we leave. Agreed?" "Agreed." They left at 9 p.m., when full darkness had settled over East Texas. The humidity was crushing, the air so thick with moisture it was like breathing through a wet towel. Storm clouds were building again in the west, and distant lightning flickered on the horizon. The forecast called for severe weather overnight, but Bo hoped they'd be done long before it arrived. The drive to Old Jasper Highway was uneventful, but the closer they got to the Kincaid property, the more Bo felt that familiar wrongness settling over him. It was like the air pressure was changing, building toward something. His ears kept wanting to pop, and he had the constant sensation of being on the verge of hearing something just outside his range of perception. "You feel that?" Cordelia asked as they pulled up to the gate. "Yeah, like something's waiting." They parked off the road and gathered their equipment. Bo had brought a bolt cutter to deal with the chain across the gate, but when they approached, they found the chain lying on the ground, cut clean through. Fresh cut, too. The metal was bright and uncorroded. "Someone beat us here," Cordelia said quietly. Bo drew his weapon and swept his flashlight beam up the dirt road. Nothing moved in the darkness, but he could feel eyes on them. That sense of being watched that had followed them all morning was back, stronger now, more focused. "Stay close," he whispered, and started up the road. The forest at night was a different place entirely. The uniform pines that had seemed merely eerie in daylight now looked actively hostile, their straight trunks creating corridors of absolute darkness between the narrow cones of their flashlight beams. The sounds were different, too. No birds, no insects, just the occasional rustle of something moving through the underbrush. Something that stopped whenever they stopped, as if it was pacing them. They'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes when Bo heard it. Not the chimes this time, but something else. A voice. Human, coming from somewhere ahead of them on the road. "Help me. Please, someone help me." It was male, middle-aged, filled with fear and exhaustion. Bo and Cordelia exchanged glances, then quickened their pace. The voice called out again, closer now. "I'm lost. I can't find my way out. Please, I need help." They rounded a bend in the road and their flashlight beams found him. A man, maybe 45 years old, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. His clothes were torn and dirty, his face scratched and bleeding. He stood in the middle of the road, swaying slightly, his hands raised to shield his eyes from their lights. "Sir?" Bo called out. "Tyler County Sheriff, are you injured?" The man lowered his hand slowly. His eyes were wrong. Not obviously wrong, not in any way Bo could immediately articulate, but wrong nonetheless. Too bright, too focused, like there was something behind them that was watching through borrowed eyes. "I've been walking for hours," the man said. His voice was flat now, emotionless. "I can't find my truck. I can't find the road, but I can hear them. Can you hear them?" "Hear what?" Cordelia asked. "The voices, in the trees. They're singing." The man tilted his head, listening to something Bo couldn't hear. They've been singing for so long, since before the tower, since before the church, since before there were people here at all. The pines carry the sound, the earth holds it, and when you die here, your voice joins the song. Bo kept his weapon trained on the man but didn't approach. "Sir, I need you to tell me your name. Names don't matter here. Only the frequency matters. Only the resonance." The man's eyes never blinked, never looked away. "You shouldn't have come back, Sheriff. She tried to warn you. The frequency is in you now. You're already singing. You just can't hear yourself yet." "That's Marcus Tolliver," Cordelia whispered. "From the second truck." Bo saw it now. The resemblance to the driver's license photo they'd pulled from DMV records. But this man looked like he'd aged years in the span of hours. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, and those eyes. "Mr. Tolliver, I need you to come with us. We're going to get you medical attention. There's no leaving, don't you understand? Once you hear it, really hear it, there's no leaving." The frequency finds you, follows you, gets into your bones and your blood and your brain. Tolliver took a step toward them, and Bo raised his weapon higher. "Stop right there. Don't come any closer." But Tolliver kept walking, his gait unsteady but determined. "You'll understand soon. When the resonance chamber opens fully, when all the voices sing together, you'll understand that this is mercy, that becoming part of the frequency is better than staying separate, better than being alone in the silence. Mr. Tolliver, I'm ordering you to stop." The man didn't stop. He walked straight toward them, his arms outstretched like he was reaching for something. Bo backed up, pulling Cordelia with him, his mind racing. He couldn't shoot this man. Tolliver was a victim, someone who needed help, not a threat. But those eyes, that voice, the way he moved, none of it was right. And then, between one step and the next, Tolliver simply wasn't there anymore. Not disappeared, not vanished. Just not there, like he'd been edited out of reality. The space where he'd been standing was empty, the road clear as if he'd never existed. Cordelia made a strangled sound. What the hell just happened? "I don't know." Bo swept his flashlight across the road, the trees, looking for any sign of where Tolliver had gone. "But we need to keep moving, get to the tower, get our recordings, and get out of here." "Sheriff, maybe Juniper was right. Maybe we should—" A sound cut her off. The chimes, but not faint this time, not distant. Close. So close it felt like they were coming from inside Bo's own head. And with them came other sounds, voices, dozens of them, singing in a language that hurt to hear. Not words exactly, but patterns of sound that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. "Run," he said. "Now." They ran, not back toward the gate, the chimes were louder in that direction, but forward, deeper into the property toward where the tower should be. The forest closed in around them, the uniform pines becoming a maze of identical corridors that all looked the same in their flashlight beams. Bo tried to keep his bearings, tried to remember the map, but the chiming sound was disorienting, making it hard to think straight. They burst into the clearing and stopped. The radio tower stood before them, but it looked different than it had this morning. The collapsed metal framework seemed to shimmer in their lights, as if it was vibrating at some frequency just outside visible spectrum. And around the base of the concrete foundation, arranged in a perfect circle, stood figures. At least 20 of them. Men, women, young, old. All standing perfectly still, facing outward, their eyes closed and their mouths open. And from their mouths came the sound, that terrible, beautiful chiming that rose and fell in harmonics too complex for any human voice to produce. Bo recognized some of the faces. The driver from the first abandoned truck, Marcus Tolliver. A woman who'd been reported missing 3 months ago. A teenage boy who'd disappeared during a hunting trip last year. They were all here, all singing, all part of whatever this was. In the center of the circle, standing on the foundation itself, was someone Bo hadn't expected to see. A woman in her 60s, wearing the simple, dark dress of rural East Texas, her white hair loose around her shoulders. But it wasn't Juniper Kincaid. "Cordelia," Bo whispered. "Who was that?" But Cordelia wasn't looking at the woman. She was looking at the ground at Bo's feet, where symbols had been carved into the earth. The same angular marks they'd seen on the trees, but larger, more complex, forming a pattern that seemed to pulse in time with the chiming. "Sheriff," she said, her voice tight with fear. "We're standing inside the resonance chamber. Look!" Bo looked around and realized she was right. The clearing wasn't natural. It was perfectly circular, and the trees around its perimeter were marked with those same symbols, all of them facing inward. And now that he was aware of it, he could feel it. a vibration in the air, in the ground, in his bones. Like the entire clearing was humming at a frequency just below hearing. The woman on the foundation opened her eyes and looked directly at Bo. When she spoke, her voice carried perfectly across the clearing despite the fact that she wasn't shouting. "Sheriff Lyle, we've been waiting for you." "Who are you?" "I'm Pastor Lancaster's widow, Helena. After my husband closed the church, I thought it was over. Thought we'd stopped it." She gestured at the singing figures around her. "But we didn't stop anything. We only made it angry." "Made what angry?" "The frequency, the resonance, whatever you want to call it. It's not a thing, Sheriff. It's not alive in any sense we understand. It's an accumulation, a collection of sounds and voices that have been building in this place for centuries. The Native Americans who lived here before us, they knew about it, called it the Hollow Song, said it was the voice of the earth itself trying to speak." Bo took a step back, pulling Cordelia with him. But the circle of singers didn't move, didn't react. They just kept singing, their voices weaving together into something that was almost beautiful and almost terrible in equal measure. "The government tried to use it," Helena continued. "Built their tower, amplified it, broadcast it. They thought they could weaponize it. But you can't control something that was never meant to be heard by human ears. You can only join it, become part of it." "What happened to these people?" "They heard the call and answered. Walked into the resonance chamber willingly, seeking the source of the sound. And once here, once inside the chamber, they couldn't leave. The frequency takes root in your nervous system, rewrites your brain chemistry, makes you part of the broadcast." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "My husband tried to warn people, tried to stop it by closing the church. But the frequency doesn't need a church. It doesn't need a tower. All it needs is listeners. And Sheriff, you've been listening." As if on cue, the chiming sound intensified. Bo felt it now. Really felt it. Vibrating through his chest, his skull, making his teeth ache and his vision swim. And underneath the chimes he could hear words now. Not English, not any language he recognized, but he understood them anyway. They were calling him, inviting him, promising him something that his conscious mind rejected, but his hindbrain desperately wanted. "We have to go," Cordelia said, pulling at his arm. "Sheriff, we have to go right now." But Bo couldn't move. The frequency had him, had gotten into his head just like Juniper Kincaid had warned. Part of him wanted to walk forward, to step into that circle of singers, to add his voice to theirs and finally understand what it all meant. The recording device in his pocket vibrated. He pulled it out with shaking hands and looked at the display. It was recording, had been recording since they'd entered the clearing. But the waveform display was wrong. Instead of the jagged peaks and valleys of normal sound, it showed a perfect sine wave, steady and unbroken, as if the device was picking up a single sustained tone that never wavered. He hit the stop button, and the spell broke. The chiming receded, not gone but manageable. His head cleared enough to think, to move. "Cordelia, run! Now!" They ran. Behind them, Helena Lancaster's voice called out, no longer calm but urgent. "You can't escape it, Sheriff. It's in you now. Sooner or later, you'll come back. They always come back." The forest was a nightmare of identical trees and wrong angles. Bo lost track of how many times they took turns, how many clearings they passed through. The chiming followed them, sometimes close, sometimes distant, but never completely gone. And every so often they'd catch glimpses of figures standing between the trees, the singers from the resonance chamber, or others like them, watching silently as they passed. They found the dirt road by accident, stumbling onto it after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Bo's truck was still there, untouched, and they threw themselves inside and locked the doors. He started the engine with shaking hands and drove, not caring about the ruts or the potholes, just focused on putting distance between them and that place. They were halfway back to town before either of them spoke. "Did that really happen?" Cordelia asked, her voice small. "Or are we both losing our minds?" Bo didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about the recording device in his pocket, about the perfect sine wave it had captured, about Helena Lancaster standing on that foundation, surrounded by people who were technically alive but had become something else entirely. "It happened," he said finally. "And we have proof, or at least we have something. What are we going to do? I don't know. But we can't just leave it. Those people, Tolliver, the others, they're still alive, still aware. We have to find a way to help them." Cordelia looked at him, her expression troubled. "Sheriff, I don't think they want to be helped. Did you see their faces? They looked peaceful, like they'd found something they'd been looking for." Bo remembered those faces, the blank expressions, the eyes that looked at nothing, and he remembered that terrible pull he'd felt, that desire to join them, to become part of the frequency. If Cordelia hadn't been there, if he hadn't had the recording device to break his focus, he might have walked into that circle and never come back. "Maybe," he said, "but that doesn't mean we stop trying." They drove straight to the office. It was nearly midnight, but Bo didn't care. He needed to listen to that recording, needed to hear what the device had actually captured. If it was just white noise or static, he'd know they'd both hallucinated the whole thing. But if it was something else... He hooked the recording device up to his computer and pulled up the audio file. The waveform display showed exactly what he'd seen in the clearing. A single, sustained tone with no variation. He hit play. The sound that came through the speakers made them both flinch. It was the chimes, but filtered through the limitations of digital recording equipment, stripped down to their basic frequency. And underneath the chimes was something else, a voice, or many voices, speaking in that language that hurt to hear. The words were clearer now, easier to make out, though still incomprehensible. Bo let it play for 30 seconds, then stopped it. His hands were shaking again, and the headache that had started in the clearing was back, pulsing in time with a rhythm he could no longer hear but could still feel. "That's real," Cordelia said. "That's actual audio. We didn't hallucinate it." "No, we didn't." Bo saved the file and unplugged the device. "But I don't know what to do with it. If I take this to the state police, they'll think I've lost my mind. If I take it to the media, they'll think it's a hoax. What about Juniper Kincaid? She warned us about this. Maybe she knows how to stop it." Bo thought about the old woman, about her warning that the frequency was self-sustaining, that it demanded sacrifice to maintain the silence. Maybe. But something tells me she's been managing this for decades, and people are still disappearing. Whatever she's doing, it's not working anymore. He was about to suggest they get some sleep and tackle this fresh in the morning when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number he didn't recognize. Sheriff Lyle. "Sheriff, this is Helena Lancaster." The voice was calm, collected. Nothing like the urgent tone she'd used in the clearing. "I thought you should know. The resonance chamber is fully open now. You activated it when you brought that recording device into the circle. All that electromagnetic energy, all that equipment designed to capture sound, you gave it exactly what it needed to expand." Bo felt ice water flood his veins. "What are you talking about?" "The frequency doesn't just affect people who enter the chamber anymore, Sheriff. It's broadcasting now. To every phone, every radio, every device capable of receiving sound within a 10-mile radius. By tomorrow morning, half of Tyler County will have heard the call. and some of them will answer. You're lying. Am I? Turn on your police radio, Sheriff. Listen to what's coming through on all the emergency frequencies. Bo reached for his desk radio and turned it on. At first, he heard only static. Then, slowly, it emerged. That chiming sound, faint but unmistakable, coming through on every channel. And underneath it, those voices, speaking their incomprehensible language, calling out to anyone who might be listening. How do we stop it? Bo demanded. You can't, not anymore. The chamber is open, the broadcast is active, and it will continue until it's satisfied. Helena paused. But there is a way to contain it, to limit the damage. It requires sacrifice, Sheriff, the willing kind. Someone has to enter the chamber and stay there. Become part of the frequency. Act as an anchor, a focal point that draws the broadcast back to its source and prevents it from spreading further. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about salvation for everyone else. Her voice was gentle now, almost kind. My husband understood that at the end. That's why he closed the church. He was going to do it himself. Walk into the chamber and end the broadcast once and for all. But he died before he could. Heart attack. Sudden and complete. And the broadcast continued. Bo looked at Cordelia, saw his own horror reflected in her face. There has to be another way. There isn't, and Sheriff, you need to decide quickly. Every minute that broadcast continues, more people hear it. More people start walking toward the chamber. By dawn, there will be dozens. By tomorrow night, hundreds. And once they're in the chamber, they're lost. Part of the frequency forever. The line went dead. Bo sat at his desk, staring at the recording device, at the audio file still open on his computer screen. That perfect sine wave, sustained and unbroken. He'd gone into those woods to find answers, to document what was happening, to help the missing. Instead, he'd made everything worse, had become the catalyst for something that could destroy his entire county. What do we do? Cordelia asked quietly. Bo thought about Helena Lancaster standing on that foundation, calm and collected, speaking about sacrifice like it was the most natural thing in the world. He thought about Juniper Kincaid and her warning that some prices had to be paid for the silence to hold. And he thought about all those faces in the circle, singing their endless song, trapped in a frequency they could never escape. We go back, he said, tonight, and we end this. How? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. He stood and grabbed his jacket. Cordelia, I need you to stay here. Monitor the emergency frequencies. Keep track of any reports of people acting strange or heading toward the Kincaid property. If this goes wrong, if I don't come back, you contact the state police and the FBI. You tell them everything, even if they think you're crazy. Someone has to know what happened here. You're not going alone. Yes, I am. Because if Helena Lancaster is right, if someone needs to walk into that chamber willingly... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Cordelia stood and faced him. Then it should be me. I'm 73 years old, Sheriff. I've had a good life, a full life. You've got years ahead of you. Let me do this. No. Sheriff, no. His voice was firm. This is my responsibility. I'm the one who brought the recording equipment. I'm the one who activated the chamber. If anyone's going to fix this, it's me. He walked to the door before she could argue further. If I'm not back by dawn, you know what to do. Bo drove through the night with his windows down, letting the humid air wash over him. He needed to stay alert, needed to feel connected to something real and physical. The chiming was in his head now, a constant undercurrent beneath his thoughts, and he knew that if he let his guard down even for a moment, it would take him. The storm was closer now. Lightning split the sky every few minutes. illuminating the forest in stark white flashes that made the trees look like skeletal fingers reaching for the clouds. Thunder followed seconds later, deep and rolling, vibrating through the truck's frame. But the rain hadn't started yet. The air was holding its breath, waiting. He pulled up to the Kincaid property gate just after 1 a.m. The chain was still lying on the ground where they'd found it earlier. Bo parked and sat for a moment, his hands on the steering wheel trying to organize his thoughts. He didn't have a plan. Not really. Helena Lancaster had said someone needed to enter the chamber willingly, to become part of the frequency and act as an anchor. But Bo wasn't sure he believed her. She'd been standing in that circle, surrounded by those singing figures, looking far too calm for someone describing the end of everything. There was something she wasn't telling him, some piece of information she'd deliberately withheld. His phone buzzed. A text from Cordelia. 3 911 calls in the last hour. People hearing voices. 2 already left their homes, headed toward Old Jasper Highway. State police won't arrive until dawn. You need to hurry. Bo pocketed the phone and climbed out of the truck. He'd left his recording equipment behind this time, brought only his weapon, his flashlight, and a small backpack containing road flares and a first aid kit. If Helena was right about the electronic equipment amplifying the frequency, he wasn't going to make that mistake twice. The walk to the clearing felt shorter this time. Maybe because he knew the way. Maybe because some part of him wanted to be there, was being pulled toward the resonance chamber by forces he couldn't resist. The chiming grew louder with each step, and by the time he reached the edge of the clearing, it filled his head completely, drowning out everything else. The circle of singers had grown. There were at least 30 now, maybe more, arranged in concentric rings around the foundation. Helena Lancaster still stood at the center, but she wasn't alone anymore. Next to her stood a figure Bo recognized, the large, silent man who'd accompanied Juniper Kincaid to his office. He stood with his arms crossed, watching the singers with an expression that might have been satisfaction or might have been sorrow. Helena saw Bo approach and smiled. "Sheriff Lyle, I knew you'd come back." "Where's Juniper Kincaid?" Bo called across the clearing. "Gone. She left the property 3 hours ago. Said her work here was done, that the frequency would have what it wanted one way or another." Helena gestured to the man beside her. "This is Dalton Worthy. He's been helping Juniper maintain the silence for the last 40 years. But even he can't stop what's been set in motion." Dalton Worthy. The name clicked in Bo's memory. Worthy. One of the old families. One of the names from the photograph at the base of the tower. "You're related to Caleb Worthy," Bo said. "The rancher who hanged himself in 1971. Dalton nodded slowly. "My uncle. He heard the frequency too. Couldn't live with it, couldn't escape it, so he made a choice." His voice was deep and rough, like he didn't use it often. "Same choice that's being offered to you now, Sheriff. I'm not killing myself. No one's asking you to die, just to join, to become part of something larger than yourself. The frequency isn't death, Sheriff. It's transformation, transcendence." Bo looked at the singers arranged around the foundation. Their faces were blank, peaceful, but there was nothing human left in their eyes. Whatever they'd become, it wasn't transcendence. It was erasure. Helena said someone needed to enter the chamber willingly, Bo said, to act as an anchor and contain the broadcast. Is that true? Helena and Dalton exchanged glances. Then Helena spoke. It's true, but it's not the whole truth. The anchor doesn't just contain the frequency, they become it. The central point from which all the other voices radiate. The consciousness that directs the broadcast. She paused. Juniper's family has been providing anchors for generations. Volunteers who walked into the chamber and took control of the frequency kept it contained to this property. But the last anchor, Juniper's brother, died 6 months ago, and without an anchor the frequency has been spreading unchecked. Why didn't Juniper tell me this? Because she knew what I'm about to tell you. That you're perfect for the role. You're strong-willed, Sheriff. Disciplined. The kind of person who could take control of the frequency instead of being consumed by it. You could be the anchor this place needs. Keep the broadcast contained, save your county, and spend the rest of my life standing in this circle, singing? You wouldn't be singing, Sheriff. You'd be conducting, directing. The other voices would follow your lead. Helena stepped down from the foundation and walked toward him. The circle of singers parted to let her through. My husband saw it at the end, saw what this place really was. Not a trap or a curse, but an opportunity, a chance to connect with something vast and eternal. He wanted to do it himself, wanted to be the anchor, but his heart gave out before he could. She was close now, close enough that Bo could see the lines around her eyes, the gray roots in her dyed hair. Close enough to see that her pupils were dilated, black swallowing the color of her iris. She'd been affected by the frequency too, was probably already part of it in ways she didn't fully understand. "What happens if I refuse?" Bo asked. The broadcast continues, spreads further. By this time tomorrow, everyone within 20 miles will have heard the call, and they'll come, walking out of their homes, leaving their families, following the sound to this clearing. Within a week, Tyler County will be empty. Everyone who hears the frequency eventually answers it. You can't fight it forever, Sheriff. No one can. Bo thought about Cordelia sitting in the office, monitoring the emergency channels. About the 3 people who'd already left their homes, walking toward this place. About his daughter in Austin, safe for now, but vulnerable if the frequency continued to spread. About all the people in his county who trusted him to keep them safe. "If I become the anchor," he said slowly, "if I can control the frequency, can I turn it off? End the broadcast completely?" Helena's smile faded. "No, the frequency is self-sustaining now. It's been building for too long, fed by too many voices. The best you can do is contain it. Keep it focused here on this property, away from the towns and the people. For how long? For as long as you last. Years, maybe. Decades, if you're strong enough. And when I can't hold it anymore, when I die or lose control, then someone else will have to take your place. That's how it's always worked. That's how it has to work." She reached out and touched his arm. Her hand was ice cold. "This is your purpose, Sheriff. Your calling, don't you feel it? The frequency chose you the moment you stepped onto this property. Everything that's happened since then has been leading you to this moment." Bo looked past her at the singers, at their blank faces and empty eyes. Then he looked at Dalton Worthy, still standing on the foundation, watching with that inscrutable expression. "Dalton," Bo called out, "why are you here? Why are you helping with this?" The big man was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because my family owes a debt. My Uncle Caleb was supposed to be the anchor in 1971. He agreed to do it, volunteered for it. But at the last minute, he lost his nerve, ran, hanged himself rather than fulfill his obligation. And because he failed, the frequency went unchecked for years. People died. Families were destroyed." His voice grew harder. "I've spent my whole life trying to make up for his cowardice. Helping Juniper, maintaining the property, keeping people away. This is my penance, Sheriff. My burden. And now you want me to take that burden." I want you to save your county. Same as you do. Bo closed his eyes and listened to the chiming in his head. It was seductive in a way he hadn't expected. Not beautiful exactly, but compelling, inevitable, like the pull of gravity or the passage of time. Fighting it was exhausting. Surrendering to it would be so easy, so peaceful. He opened his eyes and made his decision. I'll do it, he said. I'll be the anchor, but on one condition. Helena's expression brightened. What condition? I want proof that this will work. I want to see the frequency contained before I commit myself. Show me how to control it, how to direct it. Let me test it. If I can actually keep the broadcast limited to this property, if I can prevent it from spreading further, then I'll stay. I'll become your anchor. Helena and Dalton exchanged another glance. This one lasted longer. Some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Helena nodded. All right, come with me. She led him through the circle of singers and up onto the concrete foundation. Up close, Bo could see that the surface was covered in more of those angular symbols, carved so deep they'd cracked the concrete in places. And in the center of the foundation was something he hadn't noticed before. A circular depression, maybe 3 feet in diameter, smooth and worn like countless people had stood there over the years. Stand there, Helena said, pointing at the depression. In the center, that's where the anchor stands. Bo hesitated. Every instinct he had was screaming at him not to step into that circle. But he thought about the people walking towards this place, about Cordelia monitoring the emergency channels, about his daughter waking up tomorrow in a world where her father had vanished into the piney woods. He thought about what it meant to be a sheriff, to serve and protect, even when the threat was something that shouldn't exist. He stepped into the depression. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The chiming sound exploded in his head, no longer outside him but inside, resonating through every cell of his body. He could feel the other voices now, all 30 or 40 of them, each one distinct and separate but all woven together into a single harmonic structure. And at the base of it all, deeper than the voices, was the frequency itself. The resonance. The hollow song that had been building in this place for centuries. It was vast, ancient, not alive but not dead either. Something in between. Something that existed in the spaces where sound accumulated and took on weight and substance. And it was aware of him, recognized him as a potential conductor, a consciousness strong enough to direct its broadcast. Do you feel it? Helena's voice seemed to come from very far away. Do you feel the frequency? Bo couldn't speak, could barely think. The weight of all those voices was crushing, and beneath them the frequency itself was like an ocean, deep and dark and infinite. He was drowning in it, losing himself in the patterns and harmonics and resonances that made up its structure. But then, slowly, he found his footing. Found a way to stand in the middle of it without being swept away. It was like learning to swim in heavy current. You couldn't fight it directly, but you could ride it, guide it, use its own momentum against itself. He focused on the broadcast, felt it radiating outward from this clearing, spreading through the forest and beyond, reaching for anyone with ears to hear. He visualized it shrinking, pulling back, concentrating here on the Kincaid property. And incredibly, impossibly, it responded. The broadcast narrowed, became more focused, its range contracting from miles to hundreds of yards. Good, Helena said. You're doing it. You're controlling the frequency. But Bo had felt something else in that moment of control. Something Helena hadn't told him. The frequency didn't want to be controlled. It wanted to spread, to grow, to consume. And the only thing keeping it contained was the conscious will of the anchor. The moment that will faltered, even for a second, The frequency would explode outward again, stronger than before. This wasn't a solution. It was a temporary dam holding back an inevitable flood. And whoever stood in that dam would be crushed by the pressure long before their natural lifespan ended. Helena had lied to him. Or at least, she'd told him a partial truth designed to get him into this circle. Once he committed himself, once he fully became the anchor, there would be no backing out. The frequency would consume him within weeks, maybe days. And then someone else would have to take his place, and then someone else. An endless chain of sacrifice, feeding this thing that should never have been awakened. Bo opened his eyes and stepped out of the depression. The connection broke immediately, and the crushing weight lifted. He could still hear the chiming, still feel the frequency at the edges of his consciousness, but he was separate from it again. His own person. "What are you doing?" Helena demanded. "Get back in position. You have to maintain the containment." "No." Bo's voice was steady despite the pounding in his head. "This isn't containment. It's just another sacrifice, another life thrown into this thing to buy a few more weeks or months of quiet. How many anchors have there been, Helena? How many people have stood in that circle and burned themselves out trying to control something that can't be controlled? Dozens, maybe hundreds, over the years." Helena's calm mask was cracking now, revealing something desperate underneath. "But that's the price. That's what it costs to keep the frequency from consuming everything. Someone has to stand in the gap. Someone has to be the anchor. Why are you still standing here then?" Bo looked at Dalton Worthy. "Why aren't you in that circle? Paying off your family's debt?" Dalton's expression darkened. "Because I'm not strong enough. The frequency would burn through me in hours. I've tried, twice. Both times I couldn't hold it, couldn't direct it. It takes someone with..." He trailed off. "With what? Authority? A sense of duty?" Bo laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're looking for someone with enough conviction to sacrifice themselves willingly. Someone who'll walk into that circle and stay there until the frequency eats them alive. That's what this has always been about. Sheriff, please." Helena was pleading now. "You don't understand. If the frequency isn't anchored, if it continues to spread, then we'll deal with it. Find another way. But I'm not going to be your sacrifice." Bo backed toward the edge of the foundation. The circle of singers remained motionless, still producing that endless chiming sound. And I'm not going to let anyone else be sacrificed either. He pulled one of the road flares from his backpack, struck it to life, and threw it into the depression where he'd been standing. The red flame hissed and sparked against the concrete, and for a moment nothing happened. Then one of the singers broke formation and lurched toward the foundation, trying to reach the flare. Then another. Then all of them at once, the perfect circle collapsing as they stumbled and clawed their way toward the central depression, toward the bright burning light that was disrupting the frequency's carefully maintained harmonics. Bo ran. Behind him, he heard Helena screaming, heard Dalton Worthy's heavy footfalls on the concrete, heard the singers' voices rising in discord as the flare's chemical burn interfered with their resonance. He crashed through the forest, not following the road but heading east, toward where he thought the property line should be. Lightning struck close by, close enough to make his hair stand on end. The storm had finally arrived. Rain began to fall, huge, fat drops that turned to sheets within seconds, soaking him through and making the forest floor treacherous. But the rain also muffled the chiming, gave him cover, made it harder for the frequency to track him. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, until he collapsed against a pine tree and slid to the ground, gasping for breath. The chiming was still in his head, but fainter now, weakened by distance and the storm. He could think clearly again, could remember who he was. He pulled out his phone. No signal, of course not. He was too deep in the woods, too far from any tower, but he had a compass app, and according to it he'd been running northeast. If he kept going in that direction, he'd eventually hit Highway 96. From there, he could find his way back to town. He was about to stand when he heard it. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from the direction he'd fled. Dalton Worthy was following him. Bo drew his weapon and waited. The footsteps grew closer, and then the big man emerged from the rain-soaked darkness, his clothes plastered to his body, his face set in grim determination. "I can't let you leave, Sheriff," Dalton said. "You're the only one strong enough to be the anchor. The only one who can hold the frequency. If you walk away, everyone in Tyler County dies. That's not my problem anymore. I did what I could, I tried to help, but I'm not sacrificing myself for a mistake made by government scientists 70 years ago. My uncle made a choice, a coward's choice. I won't let you make the same one." Dalton lunged forward faster than a man his size should have been able to move. Bo fired twice, center mass, but the shots barely slowed him. The big man crashed into Bo, driving him backward into the mud. They struggled, Dalton's hands closing around Bo's throat, squeezing, cutting off his air. Bo brought his knee up hard, caught Dalton in the ribs, and the grip loosened enough for him to twist away. He scrambled backward, bringing his weapon up again, but Dalton was already on him, swatting the gun aside and pinning him to the ground. "I'm sorry," Dalton wheezed. Blood was seeping through his shirt from the gunshot wounds. "But it has to be you. It has to be." Bo's vision was starting to fade, black spots dancing at the edges. He could feel the chiming building again, could sense the frequency reaching for him through Dalton, using the big man as a conduit. In seconds, he'd lose consciousness, and when he woke up, he'd be back in that circle, standing in that depression, burning himself out to contain something that couldn't be contained. His hand found a rock half buried in the mud. He brought it up hard, smashing it against Dalton's temple. Once, twice. On the third strike, the big man's grip loosened and he toppled sideways, unconscious or dead. Bo couldn't tell which. Bo rolled away, coughing and gasping, his throat on fire. He found his weapon in the mud, grabbed it, and stood on shaking legs. Dalton lay motionless in the rain, blood mixing with water and mud. Bo should check him, should make sure he was still breathing, should render aid. But he knew if he got too close, if he let his guard down, the frequency would take him. So he ran again. East toward the highway, toward civilization, toward anything that wasn't this nightmare forest and its hollow song. The chiming followed him, weaker but persistent, and he knew it would never fully leave him. Helena had been right about that much. Once you heard it, really heard it, there was no escaping it completely, but you could choose not to answer, could refuse the call day after day, fighting the pull until it became just another weight to carry, just another burden that came with the badge. Bo made it to Highway 96 as dawn was breaking. A trucker spotted him stumbling along the shoulder and pulled over, gave him a ride back to town. He didn't ask questions, just handed Bo a towel and a bottle of water and drove in silence. At the office, Cordelia was waiting. She took one look at him and knew. "You didn't do it," she said. "You didn't become the anchor." "No, I didn't. What happens now?" Bo slumped into his chair and looked at the map on his wall, at the red marks showing where people had disappeared. He thought about Helena Lancaster and Dalton Worthy, about Juniper Kincaid fleeing her family's property, about all the singers in that clearing adding their voices to something that would never stop calling. "Now we evacuate," he said. "Everyone within 10 miles of the Kincaid property. We tell them there's a chemical leak, radiation, whatever we have to say to get them out. And then we seal off the area, quarantine it, make sure no one goes back." That won't stop it. You said the frequency was broadcasting. People will still hear it. Maybe. But they'll hear it from a distance, from far enough away that they can resist it. Choose not to answer. He looked at Cordelia. I'm not going to sacrifice myself or anyone else to contain something that should never have existed. If that means we lose those woods, lose that property, then that's the price we pay. But we don't pay it with human lives, not anymore. Cordelia was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded and turned to her computer. I'll start making calls. But Sheriff, what about the people already in that clearing? The ones who became part of the frequency? Bo had been trying not to think about that. About Marcus Tolliver and the first driver and all the others standing in that circle, singing their endless song. They were alive, but not alive. Conscious, but not conscious. Trapped in a state that was neither life nor death. I don't know, he said finally. Maybe someone will figure out a way to help them someday, but it won't be me. I've done all I can. The evacuation took 3 days. Bo invented a story about chemical contamination from the old radio tower site, got the state environmental agency involved, and managed to relocate everyone within a 10-mile radius of the Kincaid property. Most people went willingly. A few had to be convinced with the help of state police. One family, the Brandons, who lived about 6 miles from the clearing, refused to leave until their daughter disappeared during the night, walking into the woods and not coming back. After that, no one argued. By the end of the week, the area was sealed off. Chain link fence and posted warnings surrounded the entire perimeter of the Kincaid property. The state police established checkpoints on all the roads leading into the area, and Bo filed his official report, carefully omitting any mention of frequencies or resonance chambers or people singing in circles. He listed everything as unknown phenomena requiring further investigation by specialists, which was true enough. Helena Lancaster's body was found 3 weeks later by game warden Ransom Keating, who'd been asked to check on the abandoned property. She'd been standing in the depression on the foundation, apparently having tried to become the anchor herself. The frequency had burned through her in a matter of days. Her body was intact, but her face was frozen in an expression that Keating described as ecstatic and terrified at the same time. Dalton Worthy's body was never found. Bo had checked, had sent deputies back to the area where they'd fought. But there was no trace of the big man. No blood, no body, no sign he'd ever been there. Sometimes Bo wondered if Dalton had somehow crawled back to the clearing, had tried to take his uncle's place after all, but he tried not to think about it too much. The broadcast continued. Bo could still hear it sometimes late at night when the office was quiet and his mind was tired. That faint chiming at the edge of perception, calling to him, inviting him back. It was strongest during storms, when the humidity was high and the air was heavy. On those nights, Bo would turn on every light in his house, would blast music or TV, anything to drown out the sound that existed only in his head. And sometimes, 2 or 3 times a year, someone would report hearing strange sounds coming from the sealed-off area. Chiming. Singing. Voices speaking in languages that hurt to hear. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, someone would be found trying to cut through the fence, trying to get into the Kincaid property, drawn by a call they couldn't resist. When that happened, Bo would personally take them to the hospital, would sit with them while doctors sedated them and tried to figure out what was wrong. And he would tell them the same thing every time. You heard something in those woods, something that made you want to go there. But you have to fight it, every day, every minute. You have to choose not to answer, because if you answer, you'll never come back. Most people listened. Most people were able to resist, to go on with their lives, to ignore the chiming in their heads. But not all of them. 3 years after that night in the clearing, Bo stood at the fence surrounding the Kincaid property and looked into the forest. He'd come alone. Hadn't told Cordelia or anyone else where he was going. He just needed to see it. Needed to know if it was still there. The forest looked the same as always. The uniform pines standing in their perfect rows, the undergrowth thick with ferns and fallen needles. Nothing moved. No sounds except the wind. But Bo could feel it, that sense of attention, of being watched. The frequency was still there, still active, still calling. He pulled out the recording device he'd used that first night. He'd kept it all these years, had listened to the audio file exactly once, and then locked it away in his desk. Now he held it in his hand and considered throwing it over the fence, letting it be swallowed by the forest and its hollow song. But he didn't, because the recording was proof. Evidence that what had happened in those woods was real, that the people who disappeared hadn't just wandered off or been victims of some mundane tragedy. They'd been taken by something that existed in the spaces between sounds, something that fed on human voices and grew stronger with every new addition to its chorus. Someone needed to remember that. Someone needed to carry the knowledge forward, even if it could never be proven or explained or believed by anyone who hadn't experienced it firsthand. Bo pocketed the recording device and turned away from the fence. As he walked back to his truck, he heard it one last time. That chiming. Those voices, calling his name, promising him peace and transcendence and an end to the burden he carried. He kept walking, because he was Sheriff Beauregard Lyle of Tyler County, Texas, and some calls you didn't answer no matter how beautiful they sounded.